Jon Snow stood atop the newly rebuilt battlements of Winterfell. Fingers chilled against the rough stone as the wind ripped at his cloak. The cold breath of the north stung his cheeks, and he closed his eyes for an instant, remembering the countless times he had gazed out over these lands while burdened by the knowledge of his uncertain parentage. But everything was different now, or so he told himself. The threat from the dead was gone, the realm was saved from the long night, and the scars of war were etched into every corner of Westeros. Even so, uneasy quiet had settled like a drape of ice, and in that silence, new politics took root. The memory of conflict still weighed on him, and he saw its echoes in the eyes of the men and women who passed him by in the courtyard each day. Winterfell had become a beacon once more, yet the North needed more than victory. It needed true alliances, real hope, a future that wouldn't crumble at the next gust of turmoil. He breathed in, tasting the sharp winter air. Despite all that had happened, despite the final battles and the revelations about his blood, he remained at Winterfell, the place he had called home his entire life. He knew it was time for healing, but healing often demanded more than swords sheathed and banners furled. In the swirl of 1,000 whispered suggestions and fleeting rumors, one possibility had grown in the back of his mind. Forge a bond with the far south, with the defiant and proud land of Dorne that had always stood a bit apart from the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. At first it was an improbable idea. How could the winter-scorched north find harmony with sunburned Dorne? They shared little in manner or custom, so far as the stories told. But stories seldom captured nuance. And in times of rebuilding, anything was worth considering. He left the battlements and wound his way down the stone steps, each footstep echoing in the stairwell. He took solace in the familiarity of the worn stones. Each crack and chip reminded him of the old days, when he had merely been a bastard trying to find a place to belong. Now, he was the king in the north for some, the rightful Targaryen heir for others, although he refused to claim that title. And for many in the north, he was simply the man who had brought them together to fight the Night King. Titles meant little to him, but responsibilities weighed heavy on his chest. In the courtyard, horses snorted in the crisp air, and the clang of the blacksmith's hammer rang out. Gray skies stretched overhead, promising snow by nightfall. He paused to greet a few passing soldiers, men who had survived the worst battle in living memory. Their faces were lined with exhaustion, yet they bowed respectfully, offering stiff half-smiles. The emptiness left behind by war had to be filled with renewed life, trade, alliances. Sansa had told him more than once that to rule the north, he had to pay attention to the shape of alliances in the wider realm. A refusal to see beyond the walls of Winterfell could be a quiet, certain doom. He reached the great hall. Inside, fires roared in the hearths, bringing a warm glow to the long wooden tables. The high seat at the front of the hall was set for him, but his eyes instead fell on Sir Davos, gray-bearded and solid, speaking quietly with Lady Brienne near one of the tall windows. Jon approached them, noticing the faint wariness that never truly left their expressions. Sir Davos nodded in greeting, and Brienne offered a short bow. Jon managed a small smile. "Any news?" he asked, the low murmur of conversation from gathered lords and knights filling the hall behind him. Sir Davos cleared his throat. "We're still short on grain. The harvest is what it is. The Vale's wagons can get us by for now, but next year we need to secure more reliable trade routes. And there's an envoy from Dorne, not far from the Trident by last report. They should arrive soon." "Nalo?" Brienne's gaze flicked to Jon, her blue eyes steady. "We still don't know what they want." Jon nodded thoughtfully. He was no stranger to the mysteries of southern intrigue, though the Dornish had long considered themselves something other than southern. At times, they seemed to revel in their outsider status. "We'll find out soon enough." As the day waned, the hall began to fill with guests. Lords who had pledged fealty following the Great War took their seats, the hush of curiosity spreading. The presence of an envoy from Dorne at Winterfell was unheard of in living memory. Dornishmen rarely ventured so far north, and certainly not in the dead of winter. When at last the heavy doors were drawn open, and a group of slender cloaked figures entered, the entire hall fell silent. Their boots left wet prints on the stone floor, the difference in their attire striking. dark red and orange cloaks, linen that spoke of warmer lands. Their leader was a tall woman with keen eyes and soft features. Her black hair pulled back to reveal the vivid gold suns embroidered on her collar. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, a calm that never wavered even under the weight of so many stares. Jon rose to greet them, remembering the manners instilled in him by the likes of Sir Davos and Maester Aemon. "Welcome to Winterfell," he said, his voice projecting warmth despite the tension. "I am Jon Snow." The woman bowed her head in a gesture of respect. "I am Serafina Sand, sister to the Princess of Dorne. It is an honor to be welcomed here, King in the North." "Nice met." Jon motioned for them to take seats near the high table. Stewards hurried forward, offering mulled wine in silver cups. As Serafina sipped the warm drink, she glanced at Jon with a careful expression. "We have come north for a matter of great delicacy. My sister, Princess Zarmea Martell, has sent me with words of potential alliance." Jon sat down slowly, ignoring the uncertain looks from various lords. Alliances were the very thing he had been considering. Still, he had to exercise caution. "The North is rebuilding," he said, choosing his words. "And I suspect Dorne has its own needs in these changed times. I'm willing to hear what you propose." Serafina's voice was low but carried throughout the hall. "Dorne remembers. We fought for the Targaryen cause before, and we also fought against injustice wherever it arose. We did not forget the war you have just survived, nor do we forget the ravages of conflict that still harm our kingdom. My sister believes that together, our two lands, so often left aside by the rest of the realm, could chart a new course. One not dictated solely by King's Landing or the lords of the West." "Nanaristaha." A hush spread among those assembled. Jon watched her, his stomach a knot of anticipation. He recalled the old stories of how the Martells had married into the Targaryen line centuries ago, sealing the last great conquest. That memory lingered in their history, shaping much of how Dorne saw itself. But so much had happened since. "A new course," Jon repeated. "One that includes what, exactly?" Serafina's lips curved slightly. "Perhaps it is best if that question is answered in private. My sister is traveling north herself, incognito. She is not far behind my party, and she wishes to speak with you personally when she arrives. For now, I only bring greetings, and a request that Dorne be heard." "Now it seemed hot." Jon nodded, appreciating the subtlety. The presence of a Dornish princess so far north would be cause for rumors, and if Dorne's intentions were peaceful, secrecy might be best to avoid stirring old resentments. He gestured to the feast that had been laid out. "Then we shall dine together. Winterfell will show you our hospitality. When your princess arrives, I'll meet with her." De Romo. That night Jon lay awake in his chambers, thoughts swirling as he stared at the low-hanging beams overhead. Ghosts padded silently at the foot of his bed, the direwolf's presence a white silhouette in the gloom. Snow pattered against the small window, and faint candlelight revealed shadows dancing on the walls. He couldn't shake the sense that fate was once again weaving a strange path for him. In many ways he was tired of the Game of Thrones, weary of secrets and hidden agendas. And yet, here was Dorne, a region with its own complicated history, reaching out. If forging a bond could help the North secure the future it needed, food, trade, stability, then perhaps it was worth exploring. Still, he wondered if the Martells had discovered the truth of his parentage. Even if they had, he would not claim the Iron Throne. That had never been his desire, and the taste of responsibility for so many lives was more bitter than sweet. He drifted into a fitful sleep. Dreams took shape behind his closed eyes. Glimpses of desert sun and swirling sands colliding with the howling snows of the far north. He dreamed of a quiet ceremony by torchlight, though the details slipped away when he awoke. All that remained was a feeling of equal parts dread and cautious hope. In the days that followed, Serafina and her retinue explored Winterfell under watchful guidance from the castle's guard. They marveled at the thick walls, the hot springs, the crypts, those shadowy halls of stark history. Jon spoke with her often, discovering that she was sharp of mind, skilled with a blade, and fiercely loyal to her family. She listened to his questions about Dorne's own rebuilding efforts after the wars, explaining how the desert roads had grown dangerous, how many of their best fighters had perished. In her version of the future, the North and Dorne could create a balanced exchange. The North had raw materials, such as timber and metals, while Dorne had spices, fruits, and rare medicines. Together, both lands would stand firm without leaning on the rest of Westeros. Jon found himself intrigued by the practicality of the plan. But still, there was something more beneath Serafina's words, a sense that their princess had grander ambitions. At last, Princess Zarmea arrived under the cloak of darkness, her traveling party slipping through the Winterfell gates in secret. Jon was summoned from his chambers by a guard who rapped quickly at his door, and he hurried to the Godswood, where a discreet meeting had been arranged. The old weirwood loomed tall, its red leaves rustling softly in the cold breeze. Torches set along a path flickered, casting dancing shadows across the blanket of snow. Jon stood near the heart tree, the carved face seeming to watch him with solemn intensity. Then he heard footsteps in the snow. Serafina appeared, guiding a woman with a narrow face, deep bronze skin, and eyes that glittered with intelligence. She wore a traveling cloak lined with fur, and her hair was braided with gold cords that caught the torchlight. Jon recognized her presence instantly as something regal, despite her subtle attire. "Princess Zarmea," Jon said, bowing his head slightly. She inclined hers in return, eyes locked on him. "King in the North," she replied. "Or shall I call you something else?" He tensed a moment. "Jon Snow is good enough." He gestured to the small clearing by the pool. The reflection of the flickering torchlight on the dark water seemed an omen. She paced around it, gaze lingering on the ancient weirwood. "Your Godswood is beautiful, even in winter. I've never seen anything quite like it." Jon remained still, studying her. "You traveled a long way, Princess. I would know your reason." Serafina stepped back, allowing her sister to speak freely. Zarmea cleared her throat, her voice a lilting melody with a crisp edge beneath it. "I want an alliance, a strong one, but I also want something more direct than a mere trade agreement. I want a pact that ties the blood of the North with the blood of Dorne, once and for all." Jon felt a wave of apprehension roll through him. He recalled how House Martell had once wed into the Targaryen line, forging a bond that shaped the realm for generations. He wasn't sure what this princess wanted, but the thought of a wedding hammered at his mind. "I understand that alliances often require more than parchment and seals. What exactly are you suggesting?" She paused, her breath visible in the crisp air. "I know what you are, what you could be if you chose. A Targaryen. Though the realm does not speak of it openly, we in Dorne hear many whispers. And even if that were not the case, you are still king in the North. Marrying a Martell would unite two distant corners of Westeros. In the new peace, we could shape something lasting. A bridge between the extremes, from the scorching sands to these frozen hills. And I also understand your reluctance to claim your father's throne. I do not ask you to do so. I have no interest in seeing you in King's Landing. Nor do I want to bend the knee to some southern king who sees Dorne as a footnote. But this union can show the realm we are unified in the aftermath of the wars, forging a new identity that doesn't rely on the old seat of power." Then, Jon tried to maintain composure, even though her words echoed what had occupied his thoughts. Yet, to hear them spoken so directly stirred him. "A marriage," he murmured. "A secret marriage, perhaps, because the moment it becomes known, we'll face all manner of questions from every corner of the realm." Zarmea nodded. "We in Dorne excel at secrecy, and let us not pretend that those in the North aren't also skilled in the silent guard of their own. Many alliances have been formed and broken, but what I propose is forging a quiet vow, one that can blossom when the time is right. Until then, we keep it hidden, ensuring no one can tear it down before it takes root." "No." He studied her carefully. She was not unkind, but there was a calculating mind behind her dark eyes. Was this simply about politics, or was there another layer to her ambition? He glanced at the heart tree, as though seeking some hidden guidance. "We have only just met," Jon said quietly. Marriages for political gain are not uncommon, but are we truly ready to commit our kingdoms, our people, to this path? Zarmia's expression softened. We have time. We need not rush. I have come to know the North, to stay for a while and learn its ways. And you likewise can learn of me and of Dorne. If, in the end, we decide this path is not for us, then we part with an amicable trade agreement. But if we discover harmony in our joining, if we decide that uniting the North and Dorne with a vow is the best way forward, then we shall do it quietly, preserving the peace we have fought so hard to attain. Nauman, Jon exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Her proposal was bold, but it did not demand immediate submission or a swift exchange of vows. It offered him time to think, to see if this truly served the North. He glanced at Serafina, who stood with her head bowed, face half in shadow, approving of her sister's words. Then stay in Winterfell for a time, Jon said at last. Learn of our ways. I'll do my best to accommodate you and your party, and in the months to come we'll speak again. She inclined her head in thanks, a slight upward quirk of her lips. Agreed. They parted in the quiet of the God's Wood, each aware that a single seed had been planted in the cold ground that night. Whether it would ever bloom, only time could tell. Over the coming days, Princess Zarmia moved about Winterfell carefully. She spoke with Lady Sansa of the administration of the castle, about how the North handled trade, harvests, alliances. She spent time in the yard, observing soldiers train, even practicing with a curved Dornish blade herself, a slender scimitar reminiscent of the sun spear symbol of her house. She listened to stories from old Nan, who was nearing the end of her years, about the grand legends of the North. To Jon's surprise, Zarmia even took a quiet interest in the crypts, descending the winding steps to see the resting place of the ancient kings of winter, her torchlight flickering across stone faces. He joined her there once, the echo of their footsteps seeming to disturb the centuries of silence. She asked about the ways of the old gods, about why the Stark lineage was laid to rest in such austere fashion. He answered as best he could, feeling the hush of the dead around them. She gave him a thoughtful look that night, torch casting a warm glow across her features. The Dornish bury our princes in the scorching sands. We believe the burning sun purifies them before the next life. Here, you keep them in quiet cold. It feels timeless, as though they might wake if the North were in danger again. Maybe. Jon glanced at the statue of his father, Ned Stark, who had raised him as a bastard for reasons that now were all too clear. Sometimes I think they speak to me in dreams, he admitted. Or maybe it's only my own conscience, guiding me. Her gaze lingered on him. Blood doesn't lie, Jon Snow. The blood of old kings runs through your veins. Perhaps that is what stirs your conscience so strongly. He didn't answer, turning instead to lead her up the steps, leaving the crypts to their silence. In the warmth of the surface world, she asked him question after question about the Northerners, the small folk, and how they coped with the bitter winters. He described the lessons gleaned from a lifetime surviving the cold, how families huddled together, how they stored their harvest, how they told stories around a hearth. For her part, she told him of children in Dorne, learning to ride before they could properly walk, of markets brimming with fragrant spices, of water gardens, where even the desert heat could be kept at bay. Listening to her speak was like hearing tales from another world. Sometimes he found himself smiling at her excitement, at her determination to understand a land so different from her own. Weeks stretched into a quiet routine. Princess Zarmia and her retinue made a slow, deliberate place for themselves within Winterfell's daily life. Meanwhile, Jon oversaw repairs to outlying villages, ensuring that the roads would remain passable as snows deepened. He and Sansa worked to gather allies' help, forging trade routes with the Vale and the Riverlands. Whenever he caught sight of Zarmia in passing, he would nod, and she would offer a small smile. She was patient, but her patience was charged with purpose, as though every experience here might inform a future decision. As the cold days bled into each other, a delicate bond began to form between Jon and the Dornish princess. It emerged first in formal meetings about trade. She pointed out how Dorne's oranges and lemons could be cultivated in special greenhouses even in the north, if only they shared knowledge of greenhouse construction, a trick the Targaryens had once used in King's Landing. Jon listened with interest, intrigued by the practicality behind her ideas. He offered to show her the glass gardens of Winterfell. Modest though they were, heated by natural hot springs. She marveled at the warmth and the steam rising from them while snow drifted gently outside. Conversations turned from trade to talk of personal histories, lost family members, the weight of responsibility. There was no formal dance of courtship, but the shared burdens of leadership created moments of stark honesty. She told him of losing cousins in the War of the Five Kings, of the day she learned Oberyn Martell had died fighting the Mountain. Jon admitted that, at times, he still felt the sting of betrayal when he recalled how his Watch brothers had ended his life, and how Melisandre's magic had brought him back. The confession shocked her, but she listened intently, her dark eyes alight with empathy and a tinge of awe. One late evening, after a feast where mulled wine flowed liberally, Jon found himself alone with Zarmia in a small corner of the great hall. The fires had burned low, and most revelers had returned to their chambers. She studied him across the table, the light from the embers playing across her features. "What is it that you truly want, Jon Snow?" she asked softly. He stared at the swirling dregs of wine in his cup. "I want peace," he said. "Not just for myself, but for the people. I've seen too much death, too much devastation. I want a stable future, where we don't have to worry about an army of the dead or about lords betraying each other at every turn. But I'm not naive. I know that peace is fragile. It takes more than just wishing it so. It takes more than just wishing it so." She nodded, leaning closer, her voice nearly a whisper. "Peace is a tapestry, each thread carefully woven. Perhaps I can help weave it with you. Manzaminar." The flicker in his eyes betrayed a hint of uncertainty, but also hope. The truth was, they were strangers from opposite ends of the realm, yet they carried a heavy similarity, the burden of caring for a land that had suffered greatly. In that silence, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet acceptance of each other's convictions. Winter closed in further, pressing a chill that seeped through the thick walls. Snowstorms became more frequent, draping Winterfell in layers of white. There were nights when the wind howled so fiercely that the guards on the ramparts had to huddle together around burning braziers just to keep from losing feeling in their fingers. On such nights, gatherings in the great hall or in private solar rooms became warm refuges where shared stories and wine combated the relentless cold. At one such gathering, Jon found himself seated near Zarmia again. Sir Davos was recounting an old story from his smuggling days, and the princess listened with rapt attention, occasionally giggling at Davos' self-deprecating humor. Jon watched her, noticing how the shadows of the hearth's flames played along her cheekbones. She caught him looking, and tilted her head with a small, curious smile. He felt the faint tug of an emotion he had tried to keep at bay. He was all too aware of how fleeting closeness could be, how easily hearts were broken, or alliances undone by the tide of war. Later, after the gathering had dispersed, Jon lingered by a window that overlooked the snow-laden courtyard. Torchlight shimmered below, revealing swirling flurries in the wind. He heard a soft footstep behind him. Turning, he saw Zarmia. She wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her features half hidden by the fur lining. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she stepped closer to look out the window by his side. The tension between them hovered like a fragile thing, delicate yet undeniable. She cleared her throat. "I spoke with Lady Sansa today. She said you rarely smile. Outside of the occasional moment with your direwolf, or when you're sparring with the men." A rueful chuckle escaped him. "I suppose there hasn't been much reason for me to smile." Her eyes flicked to his, warm in the lantern light. "You're allowed happiness, you know. Even leaders deserve moments of joy." He looked away, back at the drifting snow. "I know. It's just difficult, after everything, and with the responsibility that still lies ahead. No one truly knows the shape of things to come. War changed us all, and we're still not free of those who would like to use us for their schemes." She studied him, a kind of softness in her gaze. "Yet we're here forging something new, or trying to. Perhaps a smile, once in a while, could remind us what we're fighting for." Slowly he turned, his expression relaxing. She reached out, fingertips brushing his forearm. It was a simple gesture, yet it sent a faint warmth coursing through him. For a moment, he thought he might lean in, might find some solace in closeness. Instead, he simply held her gaze, letting a fragile peace settle between them. Outside, the wind howled against the stone. But within that moment, they were untouched by it. The next day, as the sun fought to pierce the overcast sky, Jon and Zarmea set out for a short ride beyond Winterfell's gates. They traveled with a small escort for safety, but the hush of the snowy fields and the crisp morning air lent a sense of quiet intimacy. Zarmea guided her horse skillfully, despite being unaccustomed to winter conditions. She had chosen a sturdy northern mare for this ride, the horse's sure-footedness a boon on the icy paths. Jon rode alongside her, pointing out the gentle slopes that led down toward the Wolfswood, and beyond that, the White Knife River. They paused on a ridge overlooking a frozen creek. Snow-covered pines stretched out around them. Zarmea breathed in the cold air, cheeks reddening from the chill, her breath fogging in front of her. "I never imagined I'd find beauty in such freezing weather," she murmured. "But it's here. Hidden, perhaps, but unmistakable." Jon nodded, a faint smile curving his lips. "It reminds me that there's life beneath the snow, waiting for the thaw." She turned to him. "Yes, and we can be the warmth that helps thaw it if we choose to work together." He was silent for a time, letting the wind brush past them, rustling the fur trim of their cloaks. "You've said you want a deeper alliance," he said quietly. "I'm more open to the idea than I once was. I can see how the North and Dorne could balance each other." Her eyes lit with a quiet intensity. "Are you saying you might consider my proposal? A union in secret, until we're certain it will hold?" Jon's gaze moved from the distant pines back to her. "I won't lie to you. Marriage is a heavy bond, and my last attempt at a relationship ended in heartbreak and betrayal." He thought of Ygritte, of the wildling woman he had loved. The memory still stung, though the years had dulled the sharp edges. "But for the sake of the people, for the sake of building a lasting peace, I'm willing to try. That doesn't mean we rush it. We can be cautious, see how our kingdoms react to a potential bond, test the waters for a time." She nodded, her posture straightening in the saddle. "I appreciate your honesty. We have time, though not forever. My people grow restless, and I suspect your northern lords will demand answers eventually. But for now, a quiet courtship. Let them think it's mere politeness, the forging of a friendly trade pact. And if, in the end, we choose to cement our bond before the old gods or the new, we will do so with a handful of trusted confidants. The rest of the realm need not know until we are ready. Me Ben." He met her gaze, feeling the weight of shared secrets pressing on his heart. "Agreed." They continued their ride along the creek, the crunch of hooves on snow the only sound. Jon felt an odd sense of relief. Perhaps it was the knowledge that he was no longer alone in shouldering the future of the North. Zarmea came from a land so different, yet she bore the same burden. If together they could shape a path that provided stability and prosperity, then maybe all the sacrifices of the war had not been in vain. In the weeks that followed, their private conversations grew deeper, peppered with subtle moments of tentative closeness. A light touch on the arm as they passed in a corridor, a knowing glance across a feast table when debates over trade and alliances grew heated. They spent many evenings in Jon's solar, discussing everything from the shape of their prospective union to the small daily concerns of their people. She shared stories of Dorne's children, the orphans left by war, how she had established a fund to feed and clothe them. Jon told her of the orphan children in the north, many of whom he tried to shelter behind Winterfell's walls until they could be placed with families. He offered to have the north send furs and blankets to Dorne, where the desert nights could still grow cold in winter. In turn, she proposed sending caravans of dried fruits and essential medicines for the frigid season. Amid all these negotiations, an undercurrent of unspoken affection blossomed. Jon admired her resolve, her wit, and the flashes of humor she displayed when they were alone. Zarmea respected his steadiness, his loyalty to his people, and the humility that shaped his every action. They never spoke openly of love. There was too much gravity in their circumstances to toss that word around lightly. Still, the seed of possibility took root. Each time Jon watched her laugh at some story Davos told, each time he caught the subtle fragrance of spice clinging to her cloak, he felt the faint stirrings of something personal, beyond mere convenience. Of course, others in Winterfell began to notice. Sansa, with her keen perception, eyed them curiously. She cornered Jon one afternoon in the library, where he was checking on the accounts of stored grain. She closed the door behind her. "I see how you look at her," she said quietly. "Does she truly want an alliance, or something more?" Jon set down the ledger, rubbing his temples. "Both, I think. She and I have been talking about uniting the North and Dorne through marriage, quietly." Sansa inhaled sharply. "A secret wedding? Jon, you know how these things can unravel if discovered at the wrong time." He nodded. "I do. But we have our reasons. If word spreads prematurely, it could ruin the alliance before it even starts. We need more time to see if this is the right path." His sister studied him with a wary expression. "I understand the strategy. But you should also protect your heart. After everything that's happened, I don't want to see you hurt." "Near those ones." A small sad smile tugged at his lips. "I appreciate that. But I also know we can't build a future without risk. Dorne has been neglected in the realm's politics for ages. We in the North have often been the first to suffer. If uniting our houses can bring stability and prosperity, then maybe it's worth it." Sansa gave a reluctant nod, her eyes full of concern. "Just promise me you'll be careful." Jon promised, though he knew full well that careful might not be enough to shield them from the world's schemes. Still, a part of him clung to the hope that this alliance, formed in the hush of Winterfell's halls, might be different. Time drifted onward. Snow piled high around the castle, the days cold and gray. Yet within the sanctuary of stone walls and flickering hearths, a hesitant warmth grew between the king in the north and the princess of Dorne. Word arrived that some of Zarmia's advisors back in Sunspear were impatient, wondering why she lingered so long in the cold. She answered them with letters detailing the budding trade agreements and the necessity of thorough negotiations. The North's lords, too, whispered about the future. They saw the polite attentions between Jon and the princess, but none dared press too hard. Their memories of war were fresh, and if this southern presence meant a new era of calm, they would not complain openly, at least, not yet. Amid these shifting undercurrents, Jon found himself thinking more and more of the quiet vow that might soon be made. He could almost picture the moment. Standing beneath the red leaves of the heart tree, the old gods as silent witnesses, while only a handful of trusted friends stood watch. It would be a dangerous secret, but also a powerful one, bridging an age-old gulf between two of Westeros' proudest lands. Late one night, unable to sleep, he wandered the halls until he reached the ancient library. The fire there was low but still crackled in the silence. To his surprise, he found Zarmia seated at a table, poring over a large tome. She glanced up, a faint smile lighting her face. He approached quietly, noticing how tired she looked. "What are you reading?" he asked softly. She closed the book, dust motes swirling in the firelight. "Histories of the North," she answered. "I'm trying to understand more about your ancestors, your customs, the battles you fought throughout the centuries. I think it's only fair that, if I'm to join your house in any way, I know it in my bones." Moved by her earnestness, Jon took a seat beside her. "I could tell you some of those stories," he offered. "My father, Ned Stark. He would share them with me when I was a boy, though he never liked to speak of himself as a hero. He was too modest for that." She tilted her head. "I'd like to hear your version. Words in books can be so distant, so devoid of the personal touch." "Namsi." He slid the ancient tome aside and began recalling the tales of Brandon the Builder. How Winterfell might have been raised in the Age of Heroes. How the Starks had once ruled as kings in the north until Aegon's conquest. He spoke of the direwolves on their banners, the pack mentality that kept them strong through the worst winters. Zarmia listened intently, hands resting on the table, her features lit by the shifting glow of the fire. When he finished, she gently covered his hand with hers. "I see why you are who you are," she said softly. The North shapes its children to be steadfast, loyal, unwavering. A different heat than Dorne's sun, but a fire just the same. His chest tightened. He recognized that, in the stillness of this library, with only the popping embers as witness, they were sharing a closeness that ventured beyond mere negotiation. He placed his other hand atop hers, letting the warmth of her palm seep into him. A thought flickered through his mind. They were forging something fragile and precious. A rare sense of understanding between two people whose lands had rarely intersected. Yet here they were. In that hush, he leaned in, and she did too, their foreheads nearly touching. He felt her breath, tasted the lingering spice of Dornish wine on her lips, and the tension that had built between them these past weeks seemed to crystallize, but they did not fully close the space. Neither was quite ready to shatter the unspoken boundary, perhaps out of caution, or because the moment itself was enough. Instead, they parted gently, mutual agreement in their eyes that they would walk this path with care. They said little else. Quietly, he helped her gather the books and return them to the shelves, then escorted her to the corridor. Before leaving, she paused, turning toward him as though she might speak. Instead, she just gave a half-smile, one laced with promise and uncertainty, then disappeared into the dim light of the passageway. Jon stood there for a moment, heart pounding softly in his chest. He knew that eventually, a choice would be made, and with it, the North and Dorne might be bound in a vow neither realm had seen before. For all his doubts and fears, he couldn't deny a flicker of excitement, a sense of possibility that maybe, at last, the cycles of war and betrayal could be broken by something new, even if it required secrets and quiet alliances to take root. He returned to his chamber, finding Ghost curled at the foot of his bed, the direwolf's red eyes opening when Jon entered. Ghost thumped his tail once, then rested his head on his paws. Jon took off his cloak, exhaling slowly. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow, and the days beyond, would bring them closer to a decision. For now, he let the darkness envelope him, closing his eyes with the memory of Zarmia's hand resting gently on his. The wind outside battered the walls, but inside, warmth lingered, a promise that in this brutal winter, a new union might form, one strong enough to withstand even the harshest storms. Ka. Wow, say. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Winterfell's great hall, illuminating dancing motes of dust and the resolute lines of ancient stone. The castle stirred with slow, methodical energy, servants hurrying about to tend the fires and prepare for the day's gatherings. Jon rose early from his chambers, the memory of the previous evening lingering in his thoughts. That quiet moment in the library with Princess Zarmia, the faint warmth of her hand against his. Sleep had brought no true relief from the restless sense of anticipation he felt creeping through him. He made his way down to the courtyard, where the hush of winter hung thick in the air. Snow piled against the ramparts and lined every stone walkway. Men and women clad in furs moved about, attending to stabled horses or hauling heavy sacks of grain. Jon nodded to the guards on duty, who saluted briskly. Despite the calm routine, an undercurrent of expectancy hummed through the keep. The presence of the Dornish princess and her retinue was no secret, yet their precise purpose remained carefully veiled. Jon looked across the courtyard and spotted Zarmia stepping gingerly through the snow, accompanied by her sister Serafina and 2 Dornish guards. The princess wore a thick cloak of midnight blue trimmed in fur. Her hair braided tightly, the golden cords glinting in the pale light. She paused as she noticed him, offering a slight, polite nod. Jon returned it. Beneath the formal gesture, a flicker of warmth passed between them, as though recalling those hushed conversations that had slowly bridged the distance between the desert sun and the northern snows. He approached her, the crunch of snow beneath his boots heralding his arrival. "Good morning, Princess," he said quietly, inclining his head in greeting. "You're up early." Zarmia's eyes sparkled, though her voice was subdued. "I wanted to walk these grounds before the bustle of the day's meetings," she replied. "Sometimes I prefer to see a place in its quieter moments, when no one's aiming to impress." Jon considered that, remembering how he, too, found solace in the still hours of dawn. Winterfell is always honest in the mornings, he murmured. The cold and the quiet strip away pretense. Serafina, standing nearby, cleared her throat gently. She glanced around before speaking in a low tone. My sister thought it best to survey the stables, to see if the horses are adjusting well. The Dornish steeds were not bred for such weather, and we worry about them. Jon offered a small smile. I can arrange for additional feed that's richer in oats. We have some stock in the storerooms meant for the war horses. Zarmea inclined her head. Thank you. Perhaps after that we can speak more of the trade routes we discussed. We've begun drafting proposals for the transport of rare medicines and spices. Jon agreed. In my solar then. Come find me when you're ready. They parted ways amid the subdued bustle, and Jon noticed the curious stares of several bystanders. Northern men and women who no doubt wondered at the subdued ease between their king and the princess of a far southern land. Yet no one spoke openly, for the North had learned to hold its tongue when mystery stirred in the halls of Winterfell. He headed to the solar, a modest chamber with tall windows overlooking the white-blanketed training yard. The warmth of a fire awaited him. A steward brought mulled wine and fresh bread, and Jon settled at a stout table laden with parchments and ledgers. He rolled his shoulders, exhaling. The tasks of ruling seldom ceased. Reports on supply lines, letters from various bannermen, accounts of the land's gradual recovery from the war. But amid those details, his eyes kept drifting to a sealed missive bearing the crest of Dorne, a stylized sun and spear pressed in golden wax. Zarmea had written it for her council back in Sunspear. It contained references to the initial steps of a potential formal alliance, though nowhere did it mention marriage, or the deeper plan that simmered beneath the surface. He had not opened it, for it was not addressed to him. Yet just seeing it reminded him of the path that might soon be taken. Time passed, and the sound of voices in the corridor heralded Zarmea's arrival. She entered with Serafina, both of them carrying neat stacks of parchment. A faint chill accompanied them. Clinging to their cloaks, Jon rose politely, gesturing for them to take seats across from him at the table. A single guard stationed at the door gave them an air of formality, but otherwise they had privacy. Zarmea placed her documents on the table. We've had our scribes detail various roads between Sunspear and the north, along with the hazards of each route. Much depends on how soon winter loosens its grip and how we might navigate the safer passages. Jon glanced at the map she unrolled. Bold lines traced trade paths from the southern coasts, winding up through the Stormlands, past King's Landing, and onward through the Riverlands, until reaching the Neck and eventually the north. Another line curved west around the Dornish marches, hinting at alternative passages through more rugged terrain. Transporting goods across such distances will be costly, he remarked. And with winter still present, we risk heavy losses if caravans are caught in storms or attacked by bandits. Serafina nodded briskly, her dark hair swaying. We've considered that. In Dorne, the main threat is desert raiders or pockets of instability near the border. Here the threats might be winter storms, mountain clans, or outlaws. Zarmea's voice dropped thoughtfully. We need a system of outposts, perhaps. Way stations where caravans can rest safely. Dorne could invest in constructing them if the North offers the land. Jon tapped a finger against the table, weighing the idea. The lords who control the lands along the King's Road might object if we begin erecting outposts without their consent. We'd need to negotiate with them. Share the benefits. Zarmea's gaze flicked to his. An alliance that's more binding would help. If we are bound as one house, even in secret, that might give us the leverage to settle such disputes more easily. We could present a united front to your bannermen. My presence would be more than that of a mere visitor. It would be the presence of a co-ruler in some sense. Nashtau. Jon inhaled, the weight of her words pressing on him. They had spoken of this possibility in private, the idea of a covert union, yet hearing it in the context of official negotiations made it feel more tangible. He forced himself to remain composed. Yes, he acknowledged. It would. But for now, we proceed with caution, step by step. Let's secure a framework for trade agreements first. Once we show the lords of the North and the leaders of Dorne that these exchanges are beneficial, we can quietly move to deeper matters. Morn. Serafina lowered her gaze as though to hide a hint of satisfaction. "Very well," she said, laying out more documents. "We'll finalize these proposals for the time being." As the meeting wore on, they delved into details of costs, schedules, and security measures. Zarmea sketched ideas on the map, circling potential spots for outposts, and discussing how many men would be needed to keep them safe. Jon offered insights on how the North managed to keep roads clear even during heavy snowfall, mentioning systems of runners and watchers who traveled on horseback or used sledges pulled by hardy mountain dogs. Serafina noted each point carefully. The conversation was productive, the murmur of voices weaving together until the sun began to shift, sending light across the room at a steeper angle. At length, the princess and her sister gathered their scrolls and excused themselves. Jon rose to see them out. Before leaving, Zarmea paused by the door, meeting his gaze briefly. She said nothing, but her eyes carried a silent gratitude, maybe even something deeper. Then she passed into the corridor, her footsteps echoing against the stones. Jon lingered for a moment, staring at the vacant doorway. He wondered how long they could maintain this careful dance between duty and something more personal, and whether the day of decision might come sooner than he expected. Later, as evening settled over Winterfell, a hush blanketed the castle. Fires were lit in the great hall, banishing the gloom. Servants bustled to arrange platters of roasted meat and fresh bread, which had become precious with winter's hold. Laughter drifted in small pockets as soldiers swapped stories of old battles or teased each other about the cold. Jon made his way through the hall, greeting familiar faces. He saw Lady Brienne deep in conversation with Sir Davos. Tormund Giantsbane was nowhere to be found, having left for the Free Folk's land some time prior. But there were a few wildlings scattered among the crowd. Their presence, once unthinkable, was now quietly accepted. The scars of the long night had bound them to the north, in ways that defied centuries of hostility. Jon took his place at the head table, where Sansa sat beside him. Arya was away traveling, her restless spirit guiding her across the realm, but sometimes Jon caught glimpses of the memories she left behind. His sister Sansa offered a reserved smile, leaning in. "Everything seems calm tonight," she remarked softly, "but I sense the lords are growing curious about the princess. They wonder if her presence bodes more than trade." Jon glanced around at the gathering. Lords from houses Manderly, Serwyn, and Glover were seated together, sending occasional glances toward the Dornish party at the far table. "That was inevitable," he replied in a low tone. "Let them talk, so long as they don't cause trouble." Sansa nodded. "Just be aware. Rumors can pave the way for either acceptance or hostility, depending on how they're handled." He studied her face, noting the subtle lines of caution. "I'll keep that in mind." Before he could say more, a horn sounded at the far end of the hall, signaling new arrivals. The great doors swung open to admit a swirl of icy air, and several riders, cloaks dusted with snow, stomping boots as they entered. One of the guards announced them: Lord Eddard Serwyn, Master of Castle Serwyn, and his party. The Serwyns were loyal vassals of House Stark, but their lord had been off at his estates for weeks. Now, it seemed, they had come in force. Lord Eddard Serwyn was a burly man with weathered features and a graying beard. He bowed respectfully to Jon, who rose in greeting. "Welcome back to Winterfell," Jon said, motioning for servants to take their cloaks. "I trust the journey wasn't too difficult?" Serwyn shook snow from his boots. "The roads are harsh, but we've seen worse. We hear there's a princess in Winterfell these days, from Dorne no less." Jon inclined his head, keeping his tone neutral. "Indeed. She has come to discuss trade alliances. We've made progress." Serwyn's eyes flicked to the far table, where Zarmea sat with her retinue, sipping wine. "Strange times," he mused, "when the desert folk sup in the same hall as the northern lords. But if it helps us rebuild and keeps the peace, then so be it." "Mabir sopa water." Jon gestured for the newcomers to be seated and signaled for more food and wine to be served. As he returned to his place, he caught Zarmea observing the scene. Their eyes met across the hall. She offered a faint, inquisitive smile, and he nodded in silent reassurance. She faced back to her own table, leaning to speak with Serafina in hushed tones. That night's feast unfolded with subdued decorum. Lively conversation rose and fell in waves. Now and then, the harpist struck a soft melody that drifted through the hall. Jon spoke at length with Sansa and Lord Serwyn about the forthcoming attempts to bolster the region's defenses, referencing possible outposts and trade caravans. He did not miss how Serwyn's brow furrowed at the mention of Dornish investment. But to his credit, the man remained civil. If there was discontent, he kept it behind a polite mask. Now and then, servants refilled cups of spiced wine, and the hall's warmth grew thick as the fires roared on. By the time the gathering neared its end, Sir Davos approached Jon with a grave expression. He bowed his head and spoke quietly. "In Lord or Your Grace, I suppose," he began, stumbling over titles. "I've just received word by a raven. King's Landing is stirring with rumors about a renewed Targaryen claim. Word has traveled that you might—" He hesitated, then pressed on. "Well, that you might be exploring some arrangement with the Martells, all to shore up a Targaryen resurgence. Perhaps not everyone believes it, but the whispers are there." Jon's heart sank. He had long feared that talk of his parentage might come to overshadow his work for the North. He shook his head. "I want nothing to do with the Iron Throne. How many times must I say it?" "Netdermander." Davos' lips tightened. I know, but rumors are tricky beasts. You saved the realm from the Night King. You're rumored to be the trueborn son of Rhaegar Targaryen, and a princess of Dorne is residing in your ancestral seat. It's enough to stir all manner of speculation. Jon's gaze flicked across the hall, where Zarmia was rising from her table, preparing to depart. "I'll speak with her about this. We need to be certain our discussions remain secret until we're ready to reveal them." Davos bowed, stepping back. "Just be careful, lad," he said in a kindly, fatherly tone. "We've been through too much to let idle whispers spark another war." Jon sighed, passing a hand over his face. "Agreed. I'll handle it." Once the hall began to empty, he made his way to the side exit where the Dornish party was gathering. Zarmea stood with her guards, the cloak draped elegantly over her shoulders, the rich fur lined with subtle embroidery of the Martell sun. She looked up at his approach, a question in her eyes. He inclined his head. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. She nodded. Serafina seemed to want to follow, but Jon gave her a gentle, reassuring sign to wait. The princess stepped away from her retinue, and together, she and Jon slipped into the corridor that led outside to one of the smaller courtyards. The air there was cold and still, the ground blanketed in pure white. A pair of torches flickered against the walls, casting elongated shadows. Jon turned to face her. "I've just been told the capital is whispering about a supposed Targaryen claim," he said quietly, a hint of frustration in his voice. "They suspect you and I might be plotting some grand move on the throne." Zarmia's brow furrowed, and she folded her arms. How could they have heard that? "We've spoken only in private, and my messages to Sunspear have been carefully worded." Jon exhaled, pacing a step in the snow. "All it takes is a whisper. People see you here, see me as the rumored heir, and they piece together whatever story suits their fears or ambitions." She studied him in the wavering torchlight. "You want no claim. Neither do I, not beyond strengthening Dorne and the North. But the realm does not understand our intentions." "Nandimaro." He looked at her, remembering the feel of her hand over his in the library, the quiet sincerity in her eyes when she spoke of forging a new future. "We need to ensure that, if or when we solidify our bond, it's revealed on our own terms. Otherwise, we risk sparking a panic, and that can lead to betrayal and bloodshed." She nodded solemnly. "Then we must be more cautious than ever. Limit knowledge of our deeper intentions to those we trust absolutely. Make it clear in public that this is about trade and stability, nothing more." "Amen." Jon glanced up at the dark sky where faint stars glimmered beyond shifting clouds. Snow drifted lazily, catching in his hair. "Sir Davos warned me about letting rumors fester. We should address them quietly. Maybe remind certain lords and ladies that I have no interest in the throne. I only want peace for the North. Perhaps you might reassure your advisors in Dorne the same." Zarmea pressed her lips together. I will send another letter, urging them to dispel any notion that this alliance is about conquest or kingship. But we can't fully control gossip in King's Landing. The city thrives on it. Natuida. He took a small step closer, lowering his voice. We don't have to control it. We just have to ensure it doesn't gain enough traction to become dangerous. We'll move ahead with our plans quietly, and once the trade routes are established, if we still see a future in binding our houses, we'll do so in secret. Then let the realm see the results later. She listened, her eyes reflecting a glimmer of torchlight. I agree, she whispered. I wish it could be simpler. Jon felt a tug of shared regret. So do I, he said softly. For a moment, they stood together beneath the drifting snow. Two figures illuminated by the wavering glow of fire on stone walls. The hush of the night enclosed them, and in that hush, the tension of unspoken affection mingled with the heaviness of political machinations. He lifted a hand to brush away a stray snowflake that had caught in the dark braid of her hair. She froze, then let out a quiet breath, the faintest smile touching her lips. He let his hand drop, aware of how easily they might yield to something more. Instead, they exchanged a slow, resolute look. Duty pressed on them from all sides. They returned inside before the chill could settle too deeply into their bones, and though they walked side by side, they refrained from speaking in the corridors. Quiet watchers, guards, servants, slipped by, acknowledging them with bows or curtsies, their gazes curious. Once they reached the branching hall that led to the Dornish chambers, Jon paused. We'll speak tomorrow about the next steps, he said in a measured tone. Zarmea inclined her head and departed with her guards. The corridors felt colder after she left. Jon let out a long breath, turning on his heel to seek the solace of his chambers. Ghost greeted him upon his arrival, the direwolf rising from where it had curled near the hearth. Jon ran a hand through Ghost's thick fur, comforted by the silent loyalty of the beast. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. He leaned against the bedpost, exhaustion settling in. Tomorrow would bring more negotiations, more caution. He wondered if he was strong enough to shield this fragile alliance from the harsh glare of rumors and politics. In the days that followed, minor lords and travelers arrived at Winterfell, each carrying their own messages and worries. A few came to petition Jon for relief from taxes, or to seek help with roving bands of outlaws. Others brought supplies, trading grain for northern steel. The castle buzzed with activity, a crossroads of the realm's battered remains. Through it all, Princess Zarmea maintained her composure, attending feasts and council meetings, steadily forging connections with those who might one day support a tighter bond between the North and Dorne. Rumors flitted through the corridors, but no direct accusations surfaced. Jon heard murmurs that some believed the princess was simply here to learn from the North's victory over the Night King, perhaps to glean strategies for defending Dorne. Others speculated that she was searching for a northern husband among the lesser lords, an idea that made Jon clench his jaw whenever he overheard it. Late one afternoon, Sir Davos brought a letter stamped with the sigil of House Glover, a boar's head in green. Jon read it quickly, frowning. Lord Glover is concerned about patrols near the Wolf's Wood. Says there have been sightings of bandits, perhaps remnants of armies that never found their way home after the war. Nimas. Davos nodded. It's not surprising. A lot of men were left adrift when the wars ended. Desperate folk turned to thievery or worse. Jon set down the parchment. I'll need to send a contingent to handle it, but I can't spare too many men from Winterfell, not with so many travelers here. Davos scratched his beard. Might be an opportunity, Your Grace. Show the realm that Dorne and the North can work together on something concrete. If the princess has any fighters skilled enough to handle bandits, you could send a mixed patrol. Let them see cooperation and action. Nanero. Jon considered the idea. It would be a subtle demonstration of unity, but also a risk. If something went wrong, it could sour relations. Yet if they succeeded, it would give tangible proof that the two lands could strengthen each other. I'll ask her, Jon decided, but we'll keep it small. Not an hour later, he found Zarmea in the covered walkway near Winterfell's glass gardens. conversing with Serafina about some new seedlings for a greenhouse experiment. She turned when Jon approached, curiosity evident in her gaze. He explained Lord Glover's complaint and the idea of sending a combined patrol. Her eyes gleamed with interest. We brought a handful of skilled fighters, Dornish spearmen who served under my uncle. They're adept at dealing with raiders in the deep deserts. Perhaps that experience will be of use in the Wolfswood. Serafina nodded, crossing her arms. A bit colder than the sands, but we can adapt. Jon gestured toward the yard beyond the walkway's arch. We'll dispatch them with some of my best rangers. If they can clear out the bandits without too much trouble, it might set a good precedent. And so. Zarmea pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, the crisp air of the walkway carrying a hint of winter's bite. I'll give the order. Shall we send them at first light tomorrow? Jon agreed. Yes, the sooner the better. The bandits grow bold if left unchecked. Meanwhile, Lord Glover's small folk deserve peace. That night, a light snow drifted down as a small company assembled in the courtyard. 3 Dornish spearmen stood beside 4 northern rangers, all stoic in the face of the biting cold. Their breath fogged in the torchlight. Serafina oversaw the Dornish men, ensuring they had adequate winter gear and provisions. Jon spoke with the northern rangers, instructing them on Lord Glover's last report of bandit activity. Zarmea stood off to the side, quietly observing. Though the men wouldn't depart until dawn, it was crucial to finalize preparations in the calm of night. When everything was nearly settled, Jon noticed one of the Dornish spearmen removing his helm. The man's hair was braided tight, his features weathered by years under the sun. He bowed to Zarmea, then to Jon. "We will not fail, my lord," he said in a confident tone. "These bandits are no match for Dornish steel." Jon offered a curt nod. "Just be mindful of the cold. Even the bravest knights can fall if they're not prepared for winter's bite." Zarmea watched, her expression a mixture of pride and concern for her people. "I trust them," she murmured to Jon as the spearmen moved to check their horses. "They've faced far worse in the desert wastelands, though it'll be a challenge for them to endure a northern winter." Jon glanced at her, seeing the flicker of genuine care in her eyes. It reminded him that she was more than an ambassador or politician. She was a leader who felt responsible for the safety of her own. "They'll have our rangers guiding them," he assured her. "We'll do all we can to ensure they return safely." At dawn, the small patrol rode out, hooves crunching over thick snow. A handful of curious onlookers stood near the gates to watch them depart. Jon and Zarmea observed from the ramparts, side by side, but careful not to stand too close in view of others. Below, the company vanished into the hazy morning light. Jon exhaled, a small plume of steam escaping his lips. "Now we wait," he said quietly. "If all goes well, they'll return in less than a fortnight, hopefully with good news." Zarmea dipped her head in agreement, then turned to leave. "Let's hope it's a success that eases the worries of both our peoples." In the days that followed, the castle returned to its steady rhythm of chores and councils. The presence of the Dornish visitors continued to stir conversation, but no major conflict arose. Zarmea spent hours with Sansa, learning how the North managed its stores and local governance. She wandered the courtyards with Brienne, discussing matters of strategy and how best to train new recruits. She even took an interest in the forging of northern steel, visiting the blacksmith's quarters to ask about the differences between metal tempered in the cold versus that of the southern forges. Jon watched her from a distance, quietly proud of how she immersed herself in Winterfell's life. At night, he retreated to his solar to sift through the latest letters from various lords. Some wrote to congratulate him on forging new ties with Dorne, while others sounded skeptical or even worried. He responded with measured words, reiterating that the North's only aim was peace and prosperity. Occasionally, he would catch glimpses of Zarmea moving along the corridors or stepping into the library, and he'd feel a subtle urge to join her. But appearances demanded caution. They found few private moments, and in each stolen exchange, he sensed the current drawing them closer to the time when they would have to decide if they would honor the vow they'd whispered about. One evening, at last, a quiet opportunity presented itself. A mild snowstorm had swept in, blanketing the castle in a hush. A handful of candles illuminated the smaller library chamber, where Zarmea had settled to read. She looked up as Jon entered, her expression shifting from mild surprise to a careful welcome. He closed the door, ensuring no wandering eyes might interrupt. Books lined every wall, and the wind rattled the tall windows. She gave him a questioning look. "Have you come for more negotiations, or simply to find a quiet place?" He let out a soft chuckle, shrugging off his cloak and hanging it near the door. "Perhaps both. It seems these days all my thoughts revolve around negotiations of one sort or another. But I won't deny I was hoping to see you alone." Her cheeks warmed, and she gestured to a seat beside her at the long wooden table. "Then sit. This place is more companionable than I expected. I've discovered old volumes on the ancient lore of the First Men. Fascinating reading." Jon sat, the faint lamplight making her features glow. He studied her for a moment, remembering how uneasy he had felt when she first arrived, uncertain if she was friend or foe. Now that uncertainty had transformed into something else entirely. Clearing his throat, he rubbed a hand over the aged surface of the table. "Any news from Sunspear?" She shook her head, braids swaying. "They've received my letter assuring them that you have no Targaryen ambitions on the throne. So far, they seem satisfied, but they're anxious for me to return eventually, to manage the reconstruction of our ports along the coast. The war left a tangle of wreckage, both physically and politically." "Dear Mindad." He nodded in understanding. "And here we're trying to rebuild farmland ravaged by White Walkers and Whites. War leaves scars everywhere, which is why—" He hesitated, shifting his gaze to meet hers. "Which is why I think what we're trying to do is so important. If we succeed, maybe we can set a new precedent. A unity based not on conquest but on cooperation." Zarmea reached for his hand where it rested on the table, her fingertips brushing across his knuckles. "I believe in that," she whispered. "And I believe in you, Jon Snow." Her words made his pulse quicken. No one moved. The library's silence seemed to thrum with a collective breath. Then, in a moment that felt at once inevitable and daring, he laced his fingers with hers, leaning in. She did not pull away. The warmth of her hand contrasted with the chill that crept through the castle stones. Slowly, gently, he brought his other hand to touch her cheek, the softness of her skin drawing him closer. She raised her eyes to his, and in that shared glance, they shed the layers of politics and caution, if only for a heartbeat. He kissed her with a tentative tenderness, feeling the tension of uncertainty unravel in that small point of contact. Her lips were soft, carrying the faint taste of spiced wine. She answered him with quiet warmth, her hand tightening around his. The world receded in that instant, replaced by the nearness of another soul who understood the burdens of leadership, the cost of forging alliances, and the fragile hopes of a realm still reeling from catastrophe. They parted slowly, breath mingling in the chilly air. She drew back, eyes bright, a slight tremble in her exhale. "Jon," she murmured, "we must be careful." He nodded, heart thudding in his chest. "I know. He searched for the right words. "I just needed to know that what we share is more than words and plans." A gentle smile curved her lips. "It is," she whispered. "This bond we're forging is as real as the snow outside. But secrecy is our shield until we're ready to face the world." He sat back, releasing a ragged breath. "Then we proceed as we have been. Careful, gradual, but I won't deny that He paused, letting honesty color his tone. "That I find comfort in you. More than I ever expected." "Duh." She pressed his hand softly, her expression open. "As do I, Jon Snow." A moment of quiet understanding passed between them, a shared promise unspoken in the stillness of the shelves. Over the next few days, the memory of that kiss burned silently between them. In public, their interactions remained courteous, distant. But in private moments, stolen in the castle's winding corridors or the narrow steps leading to the ramparts, they allowed themselves fleeting touches, hands brushing in passing, a shared glance that spoke volumes. Neither declared love, for such a proclamation felt both premature and too small a word for the blend of need, admiration and respect growing between them. Yet each day, the sense of closeness grew stronger, a delicate bond forging in the hidden corners of Winterfell. Meanwhile, word arrived that the mixed patrol had engaged a group of bandits deep in the Wolf's Wood. The messenger reported a skirmish, quickly resolved, with minimal casualties. The combined force had taken several prisoners and scattered the rest. The news lifted spirits around Winterfell, as it suggested that cooperation between Dornish and Northerners bore fruit. Servants whispered about the potential for a broader alliance, and some of the more perceptive souls, like Lady Brienne, smiled discreetly when they noticed the unspoken rapport between Jon and the princess. No one spoke openly of a wedding or union, but hope flickered that something more profound than trade was unfolding. One twilight, Jon stood atop the walls, watching as a party of riders returned through the gates. Their cloaks were stained with mud and snow, but they carried themselves with pride. The Dornish spearmen rode alongside the northern rangers, exchanging jovial banter. Zarmea joined Jon on the battlements, peering down at the successful group. He could sense her relief that her men had returned safely. A small line of tension around her eyes eased as she saw them dismount. One of the Dornish spearmen waved up at the ramparts, a grin splitting his weathered face. Jon glanced at the princess. They did well. She nodded, pulling her cloak tight against the wind. So did yours. This is how it should be. Our people standing together. Now. He noticed the brightness in her eyes, that spark of satisfaction. For a moment, he placed a hand at the small of her back, a fleeting contact shielded by the high stone battlements. She did not pull away. "Let's go greet them," he said quietly, allowing his hand to drop. She agreed, and they made their way down the icy steps into the courtyard. There, as the returning men dismounted, everyone gathered to congratulate them. Lord Serwyn was among the group, nodding in cautious approval. Sansa observed from a short distance, lips curving in a measured smile that told Jon she was pleased by this show of unity. The returning soldiers recounted their journey in clipped, excited tones, explaining how the bandits had tried to ambush them in a narrow ravine, only to be outmaneuvered. Weapons were shown. Scimitars from Dorne alongside northern swords, battered but victorious. The shared triumph broke through cultural barriers, forging a rapport that even a castle full of rumors couldn't easily diminish. Jon let the men bask in their success, sending them off to warm by the fires and receive hot meals. As the courtyard cleared, the princess lingered with him. Snow fell softly, drifting around them like a blessing. "A small victory," she said, "but a significant one." He nodded, a slow smile tugging at his lips. "It sends a message. Maybe we found the first step toward real cooperation. If the Lords see our people fighting side by side, they might be more willing to accept deeper ties." She touched his arm lightly. "I believe so. And when the time is right, that secret vow we discussed might become an open bond." "Dimar. Become then." Jon swallowed, heart pounding at the thought. "When the time is right," he echoed. A few more days passed in a steady rhythm of trade discussions and winter chores. Raven messages traveled between Winterfell and Sunspear, carefully edited to maintain a focus on commerce and shared security. Zarmea wrote reports detailing how the bandit threat had been quelled, how Dornish expertise in dealing with ambushes merged with northern knowledge of the terrain. The knowledge that their men had worked together without friction boosted morale. Winter maintained its grip on the land, the nights long and dark. Yet within the torchlit halls of Winterfell, a fragile sense of renewal stirred. More wagons arrived from the south, carrying salted fish and exotic spices, while shipments of northern steel and furs left the castle, destined for warmer climes. Lords who once eyed the Dornish retinue with suspicion began to grudgingly admit that perhaps an alliance had merit. At meals, conversations grew more convivial. Zarmea and Serafina dined beside some of the older northern lords, exchanging anecdotes about desert hunts and the best ways to pickle vegetables for winter. Sansa often presided with measured grace, ensuring that no petty quarrel escalated. Still, rumors persisted outside Winterfell's walls. Messages trickled in from King's Landing about factions wary of a Targaryen resurgence. In hushed corners, mention of Jon's parentage never fully disappeared. no matter how many times he refused to claim any rightful seat. Some speculated that Dorne sought revenge for the deaths of their princes in wars past, while others wondered if the Martells might conspire to place Jon on the throne. It was a tangle of suspicion that threatened to overshadow their careful progress, if not handled properly. One crisp morning, Sansa summoned Jon and Zarmia to a small solar overlooking the courtyard. She closed the door behind them, the tension in her posture hinting at serious news. "We've received a raven from the Queen in King's Landing," she began, a letter in hand. "The new regime is uneasy about these rumors. They request an official envoy from Winterfell and from Dorne to clarify our intentions." "Now is scary." Jon's face hardened. "They have no right to demand anything of us." Sansa's voice remained even. "It's not a demand, more a strong request. They say they wish to ensure stability in the realm. They've heard claims that you might be forging a separate kingdom with Dorne's backing." Zarmea sighed quietly. "We want no conflict with them. But if we refuse to send an envoy, we might appear guilty. If we comply, we risk exposing more than we wish." Sansa passed the letter to Jon, who scanned its contents. A polite but firm invitation to King's Landing, couched in language that suggested they wanted to maintain the peace. "What do we tell them?" he asked, glancing between the two women. Zarmia's gaze dropped briefly to her hands. "We can't ignore it. I suggest we send a small delegation, someone who can speak on both our behalves, to reaffirm that this alliance is purely about mutual prosperity. No mention of secret vows. Just a trade agreement." Jon looked to Sansa, whose eyes glinted with a guarded intelligence. "We'll choose carefully who we send. It needn't be you, Jon. Or you, Princess. Better to send delegates who can handle themselves at court, but won't be pressured into revealing anything." Zarmea nodded. "Yes, I might ask Serafina to go. She's eloquent, and she knows my wishes. She won't crack under political pressure. Who would you send from Winterfell?" Jon thought for a moment, wanting someone both reliable and adept at negotiation. "Sir Davos has more experience in King's Landing than most, and he's well respected for his honesty. I can trust him not to say more than he must. He's not easily manipulated by flatterers or threats." Sansa considered that. "A good choice. He'll represent the North's viewpoint clearly, and with Serafina at his side, he'll show a united front without giving the court an easy target." They agreed on the plan, drafting letters to be delivered back to the capital with the earliest departing raven. Zarmea wrote instructions for her sister, detailing exactly how to dispel the more dangerous rumors without prompting new ones. Jon briefed Ser Davos, who grumbled that he was too old for such journeys but accepted his role. Within a day, the pair set off on horseback, accompanied by a small escort. Snow swirled around them as they disappeared into the horizon, bound for the labyrinth of politics that was King's Landing. In the aftermath of their departure, a strange sense of anticipation loomed over Winterfell. They had made their move to quell outside suspicions, but it might be weeks before Davos and Serafina returned. In that span, anything could happen. Jon tried to go about his duties, supervising the castle's defenses, overseeing the distribution of supplies, but found himself missing Davos' counsel. Zarmea paced restlessly at times, no longer having her sister by her side. Their private moments became a respite, stolen corners of time where they reassured each other that all was still well, that this fragile bond could endure scrutiny. One night, the wind howled beyond the walls, and Jon found Zarmea standing alone in the godswood. The heart tree loomed overhead, branches barren except for the scarlet leaves that did not wither. Snow covered the ground, muffling footsteps as Jon approached. She turned at the sound, lips parted in surprise. "I've never grown used to this place," she confessed. "It feels ancient, haunted in a way, but also serene." Jon studied the carved face on the weirwood, its red eyes seemingly watching. "The old gods have kept their vigil here for thousands of years. Whenever I felt lost, even as a boy, I'd come here to find some measure of peace. My father, Ned Stark, would stand in silence for hours beneath these branches. I never asked what he prayed for, Nine. Zarmia's voice was gentle. I can imagine. After all that has happened, maybe he prayed for a day when the world would be free of war. A faint smile crossed Joan's face. If so, then perhaps, in part, that prayer has been answered. He hesitated before continuing. I sometimes wonder if my father stands in judgment of me now, if he can see how precarious this alliance is. Zarmia shook her head. I think if he were watching, he'd see a son who strives for peace, who wants to protect his people by forging a bond with another land that has also known strife. That's hardly something to be ashamed of. He reached for her hand, the crunch of snow marking their closeness. I hope you're right. For a moment, they simply stood there, hand in hand, letting the hush of the godswood envelop them. Days turned into weeks. The castle fell into a gentle rhythm. There were no urgent crises, no attacks. The bandits in the Wolfswood had been quelled, and the roads were slowly opening to more travelers. Every so often, a raven arrived with messages from King's Landing, addressed to Jon. They were short, formal updates, but no revelations about how Davos and Serafina were faring at court. Anxiety gnawed at Jon, though he tried not to show it. Zarmia also seemed preoccupied, often gazing out windows as though trying to visualize her sister's negotiations in the far southern city. At last, a raven arrived bearing a brief missive in Sir Davos' unmistakable hand. The lines were concise. The court had listened to their reassurances, demanded clarifications, and continued to press about a rumored marriage. Davos did his best to dismiss it as nonsense, emphasizing the realm's need for trade over scurrilous gossip. He wrote that Serafina held her ground with cool aplomb, calmly refusing to be baited by pointed questions about House Martell's deeper ambitions. For now, the letter concluded, King's Landing seemed willing to accept that the arrangement was strictly economic. Nothing more. Yet, Davos cautioned that any slip-up, any sign that a wedding was truly in the works, could send the capital into a tizzy, reawakening old fears of dragons and usurpations. Jon shared the letter with Zarmia in private. She read it twice, relief mingling with the tension in her eyes. So they'd managed to quell the rumors for now, she said slowly, but any public move between us could reignite them. Jon ran a hand through his hair. It seems so. Perhaps we must keep this secret vow hidden longer than we thought. She looked at him, something raw and uncertain in her gaze. How long? Until the realm forgets your name? Until winter ends. We can't wait forever, Jon. Nippenly. He sighed, stepping closer. I know, but our first duty is to our people. If we act too soon and incite the capital, we risk open conflict. We can't let that happen, not after everything we've suffered. She nodded, blinking as though fighting back frustration. There must be a moment when we can claim our choice without fear. He gently reached out and grazed her upper arm. I swear if that moment comes, we won't hesitate. But for now, we wait. She glanced away, drawing in a steadying breath. Waiting. The one thing I find hardest. In Dorne, we're used to living passionately, making bold moves. Yet I see the wisdom in your words. Then, Jon nodded. Bold moves in the north often fail. We've learned to endure, to bend with the storm rather than stand against it and snap. They stood there in silence, the letter from Davos clutched in Zarmia's hand. The flicker of a lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls. In that hush, the truth of their situation wrapped around them like an invisible chain. Bound by duty, by the realm's watchful eyes, unable to fully claim what blossomed between them. Yet neither would relinquish it, for within that bond lay the seed of a promise, that one day the North and Dorne might walk side by side, forging a future unspoiled by the ghosts of the past. Time rolled onward, the days marked by small victories and quiet tensions. Zarmia spent hours studying northern customs, exchanging letters with Sunspear, ensuring that caravans of Dornish goods arrived safely. Jon balanced the demands of local lords, saw to the defense of the region, and carefully nurtured the trust of his bannermen. They continued to drift closer, finding solace in each other's company when no one else was near. On more than one occasion, as the hush of night claimed Winterfell, they stood by the flickering embers of a dying fire, sharing whispered words that hovered between loyalty and longing. Each such instance deepened their resolve, even as the memory of Davos' warning loomed over them. They waited for further word from King's Landing, hoping that Sir Davos and Serafina might return soon, carrying with them some final reassurance of the realm's acceptance. In the meantime, no new crisis emerged, and the hush of winter persisted. Sansa made quiet plans for the sowing season, though it lay many months away, trusting that with the Dornish trade, the North would finally have enough seeds and fresh produce to supplement their meager harvests. And so the snows fell over Winterfell, blanketing ramparts and courtyards alike, muffling footsteps and rumors. Inside, flames crackled in the hearths as new alliances took root, nurtured by cautious hope. In the stillness of late evenings, as Jon and Zarmia shared secret touches or silent companionship by the godswood, they both wondered when the day might come that their vow could be sealed, when the realms of ice and sand would be united not only in trade, but in an oath that neither distance nor suspicion could break. And although the winds of winter howled outside, they held fast to that subtle warmth, believing that even the longest night must eventually yield to dawn. Light snow drifted across the courtyard as the days stretched on, each one dissolving into the next with a gentle, relentless momentum that seemed to define this long northern winter. The hiss of torches along Winterfell's walls created flickers of warmth that contrasted with the biting chill. And still there was no final word from King's Landing. The castle had settled into a half-patient, half-tense watchfulness, as though the entire household awaited news that would either confirm their cautious hopes or break them entirely. On one particularly cold morning, Jon stood near the main gates, cloaked in thick furs, eyes scanning the horizon. He had taken to walking the ramparts at dawn, watching the sky lighten over the expanse of white-blanketed fields. The quiet gave him a brief sanctuary, a moment to gather his thoughts away from the murmuring speculation and concealed glances within the keep. Puffs of steam rose from his mouth, and he felt the sting of wind on his cheeks, a reminder of the North's harsh embrace. Sansa approached with measured steps, her own cloak pulled tight. She paused beside him, looking out at the same stark scenery. "No rider in sight," she remarked, her voice subdued. He turned slightly, noticing the subtle worry etched on her features. "Not yet. I keep expecting to see them on the road." He paused, gaze distant. "I wish Davos and Serafina would hurry back." Sansa nodded, folding her arms. "We have no control over the pace of diplomacy, especially in King's Landing. They may be forced to wait days just to be granted audiences." She exhaled a thin line of vapor. "In the meantime, the lords in the courtyard keep asking about new trade roads, new taxes, new everything." Jon's expression hardened. "I'm trying to handle them as best I can, but they sense something larger at play. The more we expand trade with Dorne, the more questions arise." Sansa looked at him closely. "You know you can't keep secrets from them forever. Northerners accept you for who you are, but they grow uneasy if they suspect hidden intentions. If you and Princess Zarmia plan to unite your houses someday, they may demand answers. And if they find out you concealed it for too long..." Jon rubbed the back of his neck, a habit that surfaced when he was wrestling with decisions. "I'm aware. We're buying time. Nothing more." His voice dropped. "But I won't let rumor or fear drive us into a rash move. We have to be certain everything is stable, that no one will misinterpret our vow as a push for the Iron Throne." Sansa did not hide her concern. "Be careful, Jon. Sometimes, waiting too long can unravel carefully woven plans. The realm is as sensitive to silence as it is to noise." "Ninahain." He gave her a slight nod, though uncertainty weighed heavily in his eyes. Together, they returned to the main yard, passing through the arched gates. Within those thick walls the castle was coming to life. Horses snorted in the stables, blacksmiths hammered iron, and the fortress's many hearths were stoked high against the cold. Jon parted from his sister to attend to his duties, leaving her with the sound of labor and the swirl of snow around them. Inside the great hall, he found a small group of lords gathered. Glover, Manderly, Serwyn, each conferring in low tones. They bowed or nodded when he entered, greeting him with stiff courtesy. Lord Glover, a broad-shouldered man with a stern gaze, stepped forward. "Your Grace, we hear talk that the roads through the neck may be cleared soon, if spring proves kinder. Do we have official word from the crown about any levy or toll for transporting goods that far south?" Jon kept his expression neutral. "Not yet. That's part of what Sir Davos has gone to discuss. Until we hear otherwise, we proceed on the assumption that roads remain open. Any toll demands will be negotiated." Then Ormocolored. Lord Manderley, bearded and portly, rubbed his chin. "And the Dornish princess, what is her stance on these matters? If they plan to move goods through the realm, they'll have opinions on how these tolls should be handled." Jon inclined his head. "Princess Armea supports low tolls to promote easier trade. Dorne has resources the North could use. She believes it serves both our peoples to ensure caravans can pass freely." Serwyn, arms folded, eyed Jon carefully. "Have you found her trustworthy, my lord? Dorne has a history of forging alliances but also of standing apart. Can we rely on her?" Jon met Serwyn's stare evenly. "So far, I've seen no cause for doubt in her intentions. Our men patrolled together in the Wolfswood, worked in unison, and returned successfully. That alone is more than most alliances achieve in such a short span." A tense silence settled, then Serwyn nodded. "I trust your judgment, your grace. We only hope we're not lured into a complicated net of southern politics." Jon didn't respond to that immediately, aware of how apt the remark was. At length he said quietly, "The North is shaping its own future, as is Dorne. We move carefully, not as pawns of any crown." That seemed to placate the lords, at least for the moment. They bowed again, and left him to tend to other matters. When they had gone, Jon took a slow breath. The constant balancing act felt more fragile each day. He set off down the corridors, footsteps echoing in the chill. Eventually, he made his way toward the library, where he suspected Zarmia might be. She often spent midday hours there, poring over old tomes of northern history, or reading about grain storage methods adapted for cold climates. Her thirst for knowledge sometimes left him in silent admiration, seeing how earnestly she strove to understand his homeland. The guards at the library door nodded him through. Inside, the fire crackled, and large windows offered views of softly falling snow. Zarmia stood before a tall bookshelf, scanning rows of bound volumes. She glanced over her shoulder as Jon approached, a small smile forming on her lips. He took a moment just to study her posture, proud, yet subdued, as if she carried the weight of a realm's future in her slender frame. She gestured to the book in her hands. "I found a record about the Age of Heroes. Speaks of a Stark who sought an alliance with a lord from the far south. It's intriguing, but the details are vague." He stepped closer, leaning to glance at the text. Likely referencing one of Bran the Builder's rumored journeys or some early contact across the continent. Our histories become murky that far back. Medimer Stow. She replaced the volume on the shelf, turning to face him. Much of Westeros' past is shrouded in guesswork and legend. But sometimes, those old stories hint that alliances across great distances have happened before. Maybe it's not so strange for a northern king and a Dornish princess to unite. He lowered his voice, mindful of the occasional servant or maester who might wander through. "We're forging a path few would have imagined. But it's still delicate. The lords are growing restless with unanswered questions, and King's Landing remains watchful." "Nah." She nodded, arms wrapping around herself as though warding off an unseen chill. "How much longer can we sustain this, Jon?" There was no accusation in her tone, only a quiet yearning for clarity. "Dorne expects my eventual return, and the North expects you to remain here. If we wait too long to decide, circumstances might force our hand." He studied her face, noting the faint lines of tension at the corners of her eyes. "If you need to return to Dorne soon, I won't stop you. But I'd prefer we wait until Davos and Serafina come back. Let's see what news they bear. Once we have a clearer picture, we can chart our course." Then she reached out hesitantly, letting her fingertips brush against his hand in a gesture of shared solace. "Agreed. I only hope they're not delayed much longer." He squeezed her hand gently, allowing a small moment of comfort in the warm hush of the library. Then, mindful of prying eyes, he stepped back. "Will you join me later in the glass gardens?" he asked softly. "I thought we might look at the changes made for growing some Dornish lemons. The greenhouse workers have already begun modifications." "Listen." She brightened at the invitation, nodding. "I would like that. Perhaps before sunset." They parted ways, returning to the charade of daily responsibilities. The sun, hidden behind thick clouds, moved in its arc across the sky. Jon oversaw a brief training session in the courtyard, where northern recruits sparred. He offered advice on defending against the curved Dornish blades, though only a few men had handled such weapons so far. Meanwhile, Zarmea spoke with a blacksmith about the differences in steel forging methods, her curiosity piqued by the North's feigned resilience in arms. Toward late afternoon, the wind grew calmer, settling into a hushed cold that seemed almost peaceful. In that muted light, Jon and Zarmea met near the entrance to the glass gardens. Steam rose from vents that carried heat from the natural hot springs beneath Winterfell. Within, rows of plants rested under the translucent covering, kept alive by the steady warmth. When they entered, the shift in temperature was immediate, a welcome relief from the chill outside. Condensation dripped from the glass overhead, and the air smelled of moist earth. A gardener knelt beside a wooden planter box that contained fledgling lemon trees, each wrapped in cloth to protect from any stray cold. He rose and bowed to Jon, then to the princess. "We followed your suggestions about soil composition, my lady," he reported. "Mixed with some ash from the hearths and a bit more sand to mimic desert conditions." Zarmea smiled, crouching to examine the saplings. "Thank you. They'll need gentle care. Lemons are hardy in their own way, but they dislike abrupt changes in climate." "Beckonem." Jon stood at her side, watching her expression soften as she stroked a leaf. In that moment, he felt a twinge of hope. The notion that if lemons could grow in Winterfell, perhaps so could a deeper alliance bridging their two lands. The gardener explained how often they watered, how they regulated the temperature. Zarmea listened carefully, nodding in approval. When the gardener finished and excused himself, the two of them moved to a quiet corner behind a row of herbs. The hum of the hot springs faint beneath the flagstones. Rays of waning daylight filtered in, lending the space a golden hue. Zarmea turned to Jon, her voice low. "Sometimes I think that if the world outside these walls had half the patience it takes to grow these lemons, conflicts would be fewer." He gave a slight laugh, subdued but genuine. "Yes, well, the realm seems to have a knack for drama. Patience is a virtue often lost on lords and ladies." She considered that, her gaze drifting across the lush greenery. "You know, there's a tradition in Dorne. When a child is born, families often plant a lemon tree to mark the new life, believing the tree's growth is tied to the child's fortune." He watched her quietly, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. "Is that so?" She nodded. "If the lemon tree thrives, it's said the child will also enjoy good health and success. If it withers, people see it as a bad omen." "Metum?" Jon's throat tightened, the conversation nudging him to thoughts of the future. One that might include children, if they truly bound themselves in marriage. "A piece of Dorne growing in the north," he remarked softly. "Maybe it's a good sign that new traditions could take root here." She offered him a small, hopeful smile, the moment charged with the unspoken possibility of their union. For an instant, it felt as though the hush of the greenhouse cocooned them away from the realm's watchful eyes. He leaned closer, drawn by the quiet magnetism that had grown between them. She didn't back away, her gaze flickering to his lips. But just as he began to lower his head, the sound of footsteps echoed on the stone floor. They sprang apart, feigning interest in a row of potted plants. A servant rounded the corner, pausing upon seeing them. He bowed quickly. "Forgive me, your grace, my lady. Lord Glover is asking for you in the Great Hall. Something about a letter from White Harbor." He seemed anxious. Jon cleared his throat. "Thank you. I'll be right there." When the servant departed, he exchanged a rueful look with Zarmea. Their stolen moments never lasted long. Duty always intruded. She touched his arm in a fleeting gesture of solidarity. "Let's talk later." Then she followed him out. The warmth of the greenhouse quickly replaced by the bracing chill of Winterfell's corridors. In the great hall, Lord Glover stood near the central hearth, a roll of parchment in hand. Sansa and a few other lords hovered nearby, their expressions pensive. Glover bowed as Jon approached, then offered the parchment. "A raven from White Harbor. There's news. Trade ships from Essos have arrived, bearing items the Manderleys claim are urgent to show the rest of the north. The letter suggests something that could shift the balance of the markets." Nemiyansinhol. Jon took the parchment, scanning it quickly. It spoke of exotic silks, spices, and, most intriguingly, some new kind of glass that was stronger than typical craftsmanship. The Manderleys proposed forging deals that might tie White Harbor's prosperity more tightly to the north, potentially outcompeting any Dornish imports. Jon's brow furrowed. They're courting the North's favor, possibly to challenge any advantage Dorne might bring. Sansa studied the letter over his shoulder. The Manderleys have always been ambitious, but it seems they want to ensure that if you ally with Dorne, White Harbor won't be left behind as a major trade hub. Lord Glover grunted. "We can't ignore them. White Harbor is crucial to our commerce, but this underlines a concern. If we rely too heavily on Dorne, our own ports may feel threatened." Jon nodded, handing the parchment back. "I'll speak with Princess Zarmia. We're not trying to undermine White Harbor. Ideally, we want both our own ports and new trade routes with Dorne to flourish in tandem. We'll find a balance." But Glover gave a curt bow. "As you say, Your Grace. Let's hope the Manderleys see it that way." After dismissing the gathered lords, Jon lingered with Sansa by the fire, the warmth comforting against the creeping chill that always lurked in Winterfell's recesses. She arched an eyebrow. "White Harbor is a key piece in the puzzle. They might perceive Dorne as competition. You'll need to reassure them." Jon ran a hand through his hair. "Yes. Another matter to juggle while we await word from King's Landing. I'll arrange a messenger to speak directly with Lord Manderley, promising an equitable share in any new trade." Sansa looked at him, her voice softening. "You do realize that all these small crises, lords feeling left out, rumors flying, will continue until you establish a clear direction for the north. Whether that means openly declaring some arrangement with Dorne or doubling down on your independence. People won't rest easy until they know your intentions." He set his jaw, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. "I know. But for now, my intention is simply to keep the north strong, while ensuring we don't provoke the crown. Once Davos returns, perhaps we can finalize something more." She nodded in understanding, though her posture suggested lingering unease. After a moment, she quietly excused herself to tend to other affairs. Jon stood there alone, gazing into the fire. Shadows danced on the stone floor, mirroring the tangled threads of his predicament. He wanted to protect the north, to see it thrive, yet each step toward alliance with Dorne threatened to rouse suspicion elsewhere. Still, the memory of Zarmia's closeness in the greenhouse lingered, a reminder that alliances could be forged with more than parchment if hearts were aligned. In the following days, the tension in the castle ebbed and flowed like a restless tide. Zarmia continued her studies, meeting with Maester Walken to learn about northern medicinal herbs. Jon exchanged ravens with White Harbor, carefully crafting letters to appease the Manderleys. And still, there was no sign of Davos and Serafina. At dawn one morning, Jon was awakened by urgent knocks at his chamber door. Ghost stirred at the foot of his bed, rising with a low rumble in his throat. Jon pulled on a cloak and opened the door to find a guard breathing heavily from some dash through the corridors. "Riders on the horizon, my lord," the guard announced. "A small group approaching from the south. They carry no banners, but one of them looks like Sir Davos." Jon's heart leapt. He wasted no time, heading to the courtyard, calling for the gates to be opened. Snow whirled in the early light, the sky a muted gray. Sansa appeared at his side, face taut with anticipation. Not far away, Zarmea stood with her own guards, subdued but clearly anxious. Together, they watched as the riders emerged from the drifting white. Indeed, at the front rode Ser Davos, cloaked in heavy fur. Beside him was Serafina Sand. Her dark hair glimpsed beneath a hood. Behind them, a few mounted guards struggled through the snow, weary but determined. As soon as they passed through the gates, Jon and Zarmea hurried forward. Servants rushed to take the horses, while guards moved aside respectfully. Davos dismounted and bent slightly, wincing as he stretched. "Gods, it's good to be back," he muttered. "King's Landing is no place for an old knight." Serafina hopped down with more grace, exhaling a visible cloud of breath. Her cheeks were flushed from cold, yet her eyes glimmered with restrained excitement. She bowed to Zarmea, then to Jon. "We have much to tell." Jon gestured quickly. "Inside, all of you. Warm yourselves, then speak." They gathered in a private solar, where a fire blazed and mulled wine was served. Sansa and a few trusted northern lords lingered at the edges, while Zarmea and Serafina stood near the hearth. Davos sank into a chair with a groan of relief, massaging his knees. "Never thought I'd say I missed northern weather, but King's Landing has its own brand of chill. Political chill, that is. I'd rather freeze in honest snow than endure that snake pit." Jon managed a tight smile. "What did you learn?" Davos set his cup down, expression turning grave. "The new regime is wary, but for now, they seem content to believe this alliance is purely about trade. We explained that yes, Princess Zarmea is forging ties with the North, but it's mutual exchange, not a quest for a throne. They asked many questions, tried to catch us off guard. But we told them you have no Targaryen ambition, no designs on King's Landing." In the end, they appeared mollified. "Damned shine." Serafina chimed in, her voice measured. "They remain suspicious. The memory of dragons still weighs heavily on them. Yet we assured them that Jon Snow's interest is in the North alone. They demanded to know if any betrothal was in the works. We denied it. I said my sister is free to make alliances that benefit Dorne, but a formal wedding was not on the table." She looked at Zarmea, a flicker of apology in her eyes. "I had to be quite firm." Zarmea nodded, her expression solemn. "I understand. You did what needed to be done." Jon leaned forward, bracing his arms on the table. "So, for the moment, the crown is appeased. But that means if we choose to bind ourselves secretly, we'll have to be more cautious than ever about any hint of a wedding." Davos rubbed his forehead. "Hey, that's the gist of it. They made it clear that if word surfaced of some hidden union, their trust would evaporate overnight. They'd assume you were building a separate kingdom or planning rebellion. That could lead to hostility, even renew war." None. A hush fell in the solar. The flames crackled, casting wavering shadows. Jon exchanged a glance with Zarmea, seeing the concern in her features. Then he looked to his sister, who stood quietly by the window, gaze lingering on the swirl of snow outside. The message was clear. No matter how much they wanted to unite, the risk of a realm-wide fallout loomed heavily. Lord Glover, who had accompanied them to the solar, cleared his throat. "The question remains. How do we proceed here in the North? White Harbor is pressing for more autonomy. Other lords are uncertain about the Dornish presence. If we keep stalling, we might have internal unrest." "Dafirom. Paddy J." Jon exhaled sharply, feeling the pressures stack one atop another. "We continue to strengthen trade. We sign pacts that demonstrate real benefits to the North. Let the lords see the advantage of having a friend in Dorne." He paused, glancing at Zarmea. "If, in time, we choose to finalize a marriage, we must do so carefully, with only the most trusted individuals present. We keep it hidden until we're certain we can announce it without sparking chaos." Zarmea drew closer, her voice quiet but firm. "Agreed. We want to avoid violence above all. Still, my obligations to Dorne grow heavier. I'll soon need to return to Sunspear, or risk losing credibility at home. Yet if I leave without some tangible form of commitment, I fear everything we've built here might unravel in my absence." Jon nodded, searching for a solution that would satisfy the demands of both realms without igniting suspicion. "Perhaps we arrange a formal treaty, one that simply outlines trade rights, mutual defense, and so on. It wouldn't be a wedding, but it would show that our lands stand together. That could buy us time while you go back to Dorne, ensuring no one interprets yours as a rejection." She considered that, brow furrowed. "A treaty might placate my counsel, but it also invites scrutiny. The more official we make this, the more some will suspect deeper ties. Serafina inclined her head. We could draft it carefully. Keep it practical and straightforward. No mention of personal unions, only the political and economic benefits. That would reassure both the North and Dorne that we aren't wasting each other's time. Davos knocked the ash from his pipe into a small dish. Sounds sensible. Satisfy the lords with a formal arrangement of trade and mutual assistance, so that if bandits or threats arise again, the North and Dorne can rely on each other. Jon let the idea settle, noting that Sansa seemed to relax slightly at the suggestion. Let's do it, he said at last. A formal treaty that shows solidarity without implying a claim to the throne. That might also soothe White Harbor's concerns, as they'll see we're not shutting them out. Zarmea's shoulders lowered, as though some of her tension eased. I'll inform my people in Sunspear. They'll want final approval, of course. But if we phrase it as an opportunity for Dorne to expand its influence without entangling ourselves in throne politics, they should be agreeable. Jon gave a brisk nod, feeling a glimmer of relief. Though it wasn't the secret marriage they had whispered about, it was a step forward, one that might pave the way for more. We'll start drafting it immediately. Sansa, will you help me with the northern provisions? And perhaps you, Serafina, can advise on the Dornish perspective. Done. Serafina agreed promptly. With that, the meeting broke into subdued discussion, everyone eager to find a path that maintained delicate peace. In the days that followed, the castle's scribes were kept busy preparing a formal treaty. Wax seals and ribbons awaited once the final text was decided. Zarmea and Serafina spent hours reviewing each clause, consulting with the Martell Council via Raven for quick approvals. Jon and Sansa did likewise with their bannermen, ensuring no one felt overshadowed by the alliance. Davos, a man of plain speech, offered suggestions on phrasing that might head off potential misinterpretations. All the while, the hush of winter persisted, broken only by the scratch of quills and the murmur of negotiations in candlelit chambers. Rumors still buzzed among servants and minor lords, but each passing day that the princess remained in Winterfell, cooperating openly, forging an official pact, eased some suspicions. Small acts of goodwill continued too. Dornish spearmen helped patrol the roads alongside northern soldiers, and shipments of southern fruits arrived just as wagons of northern lumber departed. Finally, on a crisp afternoon, word spread through Winterfell that the treaty was complete. A modest ceremony was scheduled in the Great Hall, not a grand affair. Both sides agreed to keep it relatively low-key, lest the realm misinterpret it as something more than it was. Even so, many lords attended, their curiosity piqued. The hall filled with murmuring voices, and torches lined the walls to dispel the winter gloom. A tapestry depicting the Stark sigil faced another showing the Martell sun and spear, each quietly symbolizing unity across distance. Jon stood at the center of the dais, wearing the dark leathers and cloak of the king in the north, Ghost at his side. Zarmea stepped forward in a cloak of deep burgundy trimmed with fur, the embroidered sun motifs on her sleeves subtle but unmistakable. They faced each other with the treaty parchment laid on a wooden table between them. Sansa and Serafina flanked them, along with Davos and a small contingent of knights and advisors from both realms. A hush settled. Jon cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the hall. We stand here to sign a formal treaty between the North and Dorne. For too long, our peoples have had little contact, separated by distance and custom. But we share a common desire: to rebuild our lands after the wars, to protect our families, and to ensure peace reigns as long as we can preserve it. Zarmea's voice followed, clear yet gently resonant. Dorne has always valued its independence, just as the North has its own proud traditions. But we also recognize that cooperation can strengthen us both. This treaty outlines our mutual commitment to fair trade, the exchange of knowledge, and support in times of need. She paused, her dark eyes meeting Jon's. It is not a surrender of our identities, but a bridge between two distinct realms. Sansa stepped up, handing Jon a quill dipped in ink. He signed with neat strokes. Jon of House Stark, king in the north. Then, Zarmea took the quill, signing, Zarmea of House Martell, Princess of Dorne. The scratch of ink on parchment seemed momentous in the silence. Serafina and Sansa served as witnesses, adding their names in smaller script. When the final seal was pressed, Stark and Martell side by side, those assembled allowed polite applause. The official nature of the event was subdued, but no less meaningful for its restraint. Afterward, as tradition dictated, they shared a cup of Dornish wine and a cup of northern ale, symbolizing the exchange of gifts. Jon couldn't help noting the faint tremor in Zarmea's hand as they lifted their cups. He guessed it was from relief as much as nerves. The crowd broke into quiet conversation, some of the lords moving forward to inspect the treaty's text or offer guarded congratulations. During the subdued celebration that followed, Jon drifted towards Zarmea in the swirl of bodies. She looked radiant in the torchlight, a small relieved smile lingering on her lips. "We did it," she murmured. "At least, this step." He allowed a brief, genuine smile. "Yes. And with luck, it'll hold the realm's suspicions at bay. Now you can return to Dorne with something concrete to show your council. They'll see progress here." Dandato. Her gaze flicked around the hall, ensuring no one lingered too close. "Jon," she said softly, "I'd like to stay just a while longer if I may, to see how this treaty takes effect. But soon, I must leave. My people need me." He dipped his head in understanding. "Oh, of course. I'll do what I can to ensure the treaty gains footing immediately. And when you go, I'll remain in correspondence. We'll keep building on what we've started." Her eyes studied his face for a moment, as if memorizing his features. "I only regret that we can't finalize our personal vow just yet." His chest tightened. "It isn't safe. But in time." He reached out discreetly, letting his fingertips graze hers. "This treaty isn't the end. It's a beginning. One that could lead us to that vow when the realm's calmer. And the realm has to see that we're not a threat, that our alliance benefits everyone." She gave a subtle nod, drawing back before any wandering gaze could note their closeness. In that fleeting contact, though, Jon felt the pulse of shared commitment. The signing of the treaty was a fragile shield against suspicion, but if they tended it well, perhaps it would grow into an impenetrable wall, behind which a union of hearts might safely flourish. That night, a modest feast was held in the great hall. Stews, freshly baked bread, spiced wine. The conversation turned toward lighter topics, laughter rising over tables. Northern lords entertained the Dornish guests with stories of the long night's last battles, while the Dornish spearmen recounted desert hunts for giant lizards in the deep sands. Though tension underlay these interactions, the outward display was one of amicable cooperation. Jon noted how easily some of the castle folk mingled, comparing weapons or discussing recipes for stewed vegetables. Peace, he realized, often grew not from grand gestures, but from these small acts of shared humanity. Late in the evening, as the fires burned low and many had retired, Jon lingered at the dais with Davos. The older knight leaned on the back of a chair, exhaustion plain in his posture, but a glint of satisfaction shone in his eyes. "We've come a long way," he said, voice hushed. "A year ago, we were bracing for the dead to overrun us. Now, we're forging alliances across the realm. One might almost call it hope." Jon looked at his friend, a faint smile on his lips. "Hope is fragile, but yes, it's here. Let's guard it well." Davos nodded. "I'll drink to that, lad. Sleep well. We've earned some rest." Jon watched him go, then found himself gazing across the hall. Zarmea was speaking with Serafina and Sansa, the three women in quiet conference. Their postures suggested familiarity, even warmth. He felt a surge of gratitude that in the wake of so much horror, they had reached this point of tentative rebuilding. Silently he slipped away, ascending the dark stairwells to his chambers. Outside the tall window at the end of the corridor, the night sky stretched over the snowbound land. Stars flickered in the cold air, and a half-moon cast silvery light across Winterfell's battlements. Ghost padded along beside Jon, his white fur almost glowing in the moonlight. At times like this, Joan's thoughts drifted to the ancestral Starks who once roamed these halls, their ghosts possibly watching from the crypts. He wondered if they approved of the choices he was making, the alliances he sought, the quiet vow in his heart. But the only answer was the soft hush of wind, the castle's ancient voice that spoke in cracks of timber, and the whistle of icy draft. Inside his room, he removed his cloak and armor piece by piece, draping them on a wooden stand. The chamber was warmed by a hearth, the flames dancing lower now that night was well advanced. He sat on the edge of his bed, mind churning with all that had happened. In the flickering half-light, the outline of a small table drew his attention. On it lay a single sprig of a lemon branch, a token he had found in the greenhouse the previous day. He had picked it absently, carrying it here as a reminder of what they were trying to cultivate. He lifted the sprig, running his thumb over the waxy leaf. In the faint glow, its green surface looked alive, strong despite being far from its native sun. That leaf might wither if neglected, just as their alliance would. But if tended carefully, it could thrive. Gazing at it, he felt a tug of resolve. However long it took, whatever obstacles lay ahead, he would do everything in his power to see that the North and Dorne remained united, and that the bond he shared with Zarmia might one day bloom secret no longer. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams fluttered at the edge of his consciousness. Visions of desert sands meeting snowy fields, of a quiet wedding in the godswood under the watchful face of the weirwood, the hush of lanterns casting circles of light on the stone. In the dream he saw smiling faces, though they were blurred. Sansa, Davos, Brienne, maybe even Tormund. Zarmea stood beside him, veiled in delicate fabric, the swirl of red and gold. He thought he heard whispering voices, but the words eluded him, lost to the rush of dream logic. When he woke, dawn was a mere suggestion at the window, faint light creeping across the sky. He rose, donned his cloak, and made his way down to the courtyard again. The routine comforted him, seeing the guards, hearing the smithy's hammer, watching stable hands feed horses. People greeted him with quiet deference, some clearly curious about what the new treaty might bring. He offered them calm assurances, though in truth, he had no certain answers. The realm was fluid, shifting with each rumor, each signature, each new piece of news from afar. He headed to the hall for a morning meal, expecting a subdued gathering. Instead, he found it unexpectedly lively. A small group of traveling merchants had arrived before sunrise, carrying salted fish from the coast. They chattered with the castle cooks about fair prices, while a few guards supervised. Over near the hearth, Zarmea and Serafina conversed with Sansa and Lord Surin. Jon approached, drawn by the low hum of discussion. Zarmea greeted him with a nod, her expression poised. "We were just discussing how this treaty might impact shipments from Essos. Lord Serwyn thinks White Harbor will attract more foreign vessels if the merchants believe they can sell goods up here without high tariffs." Jon joined them, listening as Serwyn explained his concerns about local craftsmen being undercut by cheaper foreign wares. Sansa countered that competition could enrich the market if managed properly. Zarmea added that Dorne faced similar challenges with ships from the free cities. Through it all, Jon remained silent, letting them talk it through. He realized with a small burst of pride that this was exactly the kind of exchange the realm needed. Practical, cooperative, untainted by the old grudges and suspicions. That was the promise of the treaty, and behind it, the still hidden promise of a deeper bond. Later, after Serwyn left to oversee some distribution of supplies, Zarmea pulled Jon aside. She spoke in a soft tone, mindful of onlookers. "The treaty is well received so far, but let's not fool ourselves. This won't solve every issue overnight." He glanced around the bustling hall. "No, but it's a step. Thank you for your patience. I know you must be itching to return home." She lifted her gaze to meet his. "I'll remain a while longer to see that this treaty is truly rooted. Then I'll go home and ensure Dorne upholds its end. After that, we'll see." He understood the unspoken meaning. They would see if events allowed them the freedom to take the next step, one that could forever change the course of their lives and the fate of the North and Dorne. He reached out as though to clasp her hand, but seeing people moving nearby, He halted. Instead, he gave a slight bow, voice tinged with quiet emotion. "Your presence here matters. I won't forget that." She smiled, turning to slip through the crowd toward Serafina, leaving him standing there amid the swirl of castle life. Over the next week, the calm introduction of the treaty continued. Ravens flew out from Winterfell carrying copies of the signed documents to various lords, ensuring everyone understood the new arrangement. Some responded with polite approval. Others questioned details, but no open resistance emerged. King's Landing sent a terse note acknowledging the treaty, but offering no condemnation, which itself was a mild victory. Zarmea devoted more time to finalizing how many caravans would travel north, which items needed special handling, how to train more of her men to operate in snowy conditions. Jon, in turn, coordinated with White Harbor, promising them a share of tariffs and trade routes that would pass through the port. The days passed in a flurry of practicalities, leaving little room for personal reflection. One evening, however, on the eve of a scheduled caravan departing for Dorne, Jon found Zarmea alone in the old training yard, a torch placed in a bracket on the wall. The sky overhead was spangled with stars, and the courtyard was eerily silent, the snow crunching underfoot. She practiced with a slender Dornish blade, weaving slow arcs in the cold night air. He watched for a moment, noticing the fluid grace in her movements, a hint of desert warmth in this icy domain. When she noticed him, she lowered the blade. "I'm here to clear my mind," she said softly. The hush is soothing. He stepped closer, the wind teasing a lock of dark hair that had escaped her braid. "Tomorrow's caravan. Are you traveling with it?" She shook her head, returning the blade to its sheath. "Not yet. I'm sending goods and a handful of my retinue ahead, so they can begin arrangements. I'll stay a bit longer. I want to see how White Harbor handles a portion of these items before I leave." He exhaled, both relieved and aware that her departure could come at any time. "I'm glad," he admitted, "though I know your people miss you. Have you told them when to expect your return?" She nodded. "They know it will be soon. My sister's presence has reassured them that we're truly forging a path here. But time is running short. I can't linger forever." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other under the starlight. The hush of the courtyard wrapped them in a bubble of stillness, though Ghost, somewhere near the entrance, stood watch with silent vigilance. Zarmea finally reached out, placing a hand on Jon's chest, over the thick coat he wore to fend off the cold. He felt the warmth of her palm through the layers of fabric. "When I leave," she said, voice catching slightly, "I want to know that this treaty isn't the only bond between us, that we hold more in our hearts than words on parchment." He covered her hand with his own, his breath visible in the crisp air. "We do," he whispered. "For all the secrecy and caution, I know what we share is more than a political arrangement." He paused, searching her gaze. "Perhaps when the time is right, when we're certain it won't tear the realm apart, we'll take the vow we spoke of. In private, if need be, with only those we trust." Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "I'll carry that promise with me, Jon Snow. And if the realm does threaten to tear us apart, let them face our combined strength, our loyalty to each other." He lowered his head, lips a breath away from hers, wanting more than anything to close the distance. She leaned in, meeting him in a soft, lingering kiss. In that moment, the winter cold felt distant, the castle's burdens receding into silence. All that remained was the warmth of human closeness beneath a tapestry of stars. When they finally broke apart, she swallowed hard, stepping back. "We must be mindful," she murmured, though her eyes shone with a fierce light. He nodded, a quiet ache in his chest. "We will. But let us keep this memory for the nights to come." He glanced around, ensuring no figure lurked in the shadows. The courtyard was empty. Only the torch flame flickered against the wall. He turned back to her. "I wish things were simpler." She offered a faint, wry smile. "So do I. But our hearts don't choose the simplest path, do they?" He shook his head, gently pressing her hand once more before letting go. "No, they don't. Go rest. Tomorrow is a new day, more caravans and negotiations. And I'll be here, ready to face whatever challenges arise." She nodded, sliding the blade's hilt further into the sheath at her waist. Then she moved past him, footsteps soft against the snowy ground, disappearing into the corridor that led to the princess chambers. Jon stood there a while longer, gazing up at the stars. He wondered if the old gods, or the Seven, or any higher power looked down on him, on them, with blessing or with warning. The night gave no answers, only the crisp glitter of distant lights. In the days that followed, the first caravan under the official treaty made its journey toward the south, carrying northern steel and fine pelts. Word arrived that it passed safely through the neck, even stopping at several outposts without issue. Meanwhile, the goods from Dorne that had already arrived in White Harbor found eager buyers. Seafaring merchants intrigued by exotic spices, local lords drawn to the novelty of fresh citrus. The treaty thus took its first tangible steps, reinforcing the notion that both realms could benefit when working in tandem. Zarmea oversaw each step with meticulous attention, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Jon, for his part, fielded questions from lords worried about whether the crown might levy new taxes or if this arrangement gave Dorne special privileges. Slowly, the foundation of trust settled into place. Even Lord Manderley, famously protective of his port, sent a raven praising the judicious manner in which their commerce was unfolding. Yet, with each day that the treaty gained traction, Zarmea's departure loomed nearer. All knew that she would return to Dorne eventually, and though she said little of it openly, Jon saw the impatience in her eyes when new messages arrived from Sunspear, pressing for her presence. The nights they shared remained carefully discreet, fleeting moments of conversation and a stolen embrace. Neither spoke openly of the day she would leave, but the knowledge colored every interaction, adding a gentle poignancy to their closeness. At last, nearly 3 fortnights after the treaty's signing, Zarmea announced to the courtyard that she would depart for Dorne in 3 days' time. The announcement was no surprise. Her retinue had been making preparations, but hearing it aloud sent a ripple of finality through the castle. Some of the northern lords expressed gratitude for her role in solidifying the alliance. Others quietly noted that they would watch how events unfolded once she was gone. The morning after her declaration, the castle staff began loading wagons with the last of her personal effects, carefully wrapping the lemon saplings from the greenhouse to withstand travel. The roads were slightly less frozen than before, but the journey south would still be arduous in midwinter. Jon busied himself with official tasks, but his thoughts drifted constantly to the moment of farewell. He recalled how each meeting in the Godswood or greenhouse had brought them a step closer to something profound, and how every vow in the hush of night felt like a precious secret. Now, as the day of her departure neared, he realized how difficult it would be to let her go without a binding promise. On the final evening before her planned departure, Zarmea summoned Jon to the library with a brief note. He found her alone there, a single lamp illuminating the old table at which they had once studied. She wore a traveling cloak, though it was unfastened, draped across her shoulders. She looked up as he entered, managing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He closed the door behind him, the thick wooden panels muffling the castle's distant hum. "You're ready?" he asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted the answer. She took a breath, nodding. "As ready as I can be. Caravan sets out at dawn. The roads might be passable enough to get us to the Crossroads Inn by nightfall, if we push hard." "And, Eddie." He moved closer, the lamplight revealing the lines of concern etched on his face. "I'll have some of my best men escort you. The route is safer now than it was months ago, but we can't be too careful." She stepped toward him. "Thank you. But I also wanted..." She paused, collecting herself. "I wanted to see you alone, to say goodbye properly." He swallowed, a surge of emotion threatening to break his composure. "This isn't goodbye forever. We'll keep writing, keep coordinating. And once it's safe, once the realm has settled..." She reached up, cupping his cheek with a trembling hand. "I know. Still, we part without a formal vow, without the ceremony that would unite us. But I understand why we must, for now." He covered her hand with his own, leaning into the warmth of her touch. "I won't forget what we've shared. The vow we spoke of, marriage in secret if need be, stands. When the day comes that we can keep it, I'll do so, no matter what obstacle arises." She closed her eyes briefly, as though memorizing the moment. "And I'll keep that promise in my heart. It's a fragile hope, but it's ours." They stood in silence, each drawn by the heavy pull of unspoken longing. Then gently, she rose on her toes, brushing her lips against his. The kiss was tender and laced with the ache of separation, months of stifled affection distilled in a single moment. He pulled her closer, arms sliding around her waist, the cloak falling open. Neither spoke, for words could do little justice to the complexity of what lay between them. Fierce yearning, cautious optimism, shared burdens. The lamp's glow shivered over them, sending shadows dancing across the shelves and ancient tomes. When they finally parted, her eyes were bright with tears. She refused to let fall. He felt the weight of finality pressing in. "Go," he said huskily. "Return to your people. Show them this treaty can work. And when you're ready, or when the realm allows, come back to me." She nodded, sliding out of his arms. "I will." Gathering her cloak more tightly, she took a shaky breath. "Farewell, Jon Snow. Or rather, until we meet again." With that, she moved to the door, pausing only once to glance back at him. He remained still, heart pounding, his chest tight. The door closed softly behind her, and he was alone in the flickering half-dark. Dawn came all too soon. The courtyard bustled with final preparations for the journey. Horses stamped in the cold, breath fogging the air. Guards double-checked harnesses, while servants loaded provisions into wagons. Zarmia and Serafina mounted their sturdy steeds, each wrapped in thick winter cloaks lined with fur. A cluster of onlookers gathered to witness their departure, some out of respect, others out of curiosity. Jon stood beside Sansa and Davos, watching the scene with stoic composure. He exchanged nods with Zarmia as she prepared to guide her horse forward. Sansa stepped up, offering a polite bow. "Safe travels, Princess. May this alliance flourish under warmer skies." Zarmia returned the courtesy. "Thank you, Lady Sansa. I'll remember all you taught me about northern customs. This land is not so strange to me now." Jon managed a formal smile in front of the crowd. "Until next time, Princess. May the roads be kind." "Oh." She gave a tiny nod, a world of unspoken meaning in her gaze. Then she wheeled her horse around, Serafina following. The party rode out of Winterfell's gates, banners fluttering in the wind. The watchers lingered, silent, until the travelers vanished into the horizon. Only then did the courtyard slowly return to its routine, a certain hush settling over the stones as though an intangible presence had departed. Jon turned away, swallowing the surge of emptiness he felt. He could not linger in regrets. There was too much to do. The North needed him, as did the new treaty. If all went well, one day, the realm would be calm enough for him to claim the vow that now existed only in whispers of the heart. For now, he would uphold the alliance they had signed, letting it stand as a symbol of a broader vision, that people from different corners of the world, shaped by snow or sun, could stand together against the cruelties of fate. The next hours blurred in a haze of tasks. He listened to reports, approved ration allotments, checked on guard rotations. Yet his mind strayed to the image of Zarmia riding south, her cloak trailing behind her, the rising sun catching the threads of gold embroidery. The castle felt quieter, as though something vital had slipped away. Even Ghost, pacing around Jon's heels, seemed to sense his master's subdued mood. In the evening, Jon found himself drawn to the Godswood, its ancient weirwood branches crowned with red leaves against the snow. He knelt by the still pool beneath the heart tree, hands resting on his thighs. The face carved into the trunk watched him with centuries-old eyes. He closed his own, letting the hush swallow him. Soft flakes of snow landed in his hair and on his shoulders, melting slowly. He inhaled, the cold air piercing his lungs. He remembered standing here with Zarmia on that first night of her arrival, hearing her speak of forging a new path. The thought that she was now countless miles away tightened his chest. Yet he also recalled the vow they had kept secret, the promise that one day, if fate allowed, they would unite as more than allies. Two souls bridging the distance between winter's chill and the desert's sun. He exhaled, feeling the slow, rhythmic beat of his heart. The old gods offered no answer, only the quiet acceptance that had always defined this place. He rose after a moment, turning away from the carved face. As he walked toward the castle lights, faint and comforting in the encroaching darkness, he felt a flicker of resolve. This was not an ending, but a turning point. The pact with Dorne was sealed, and the realm might soon witness the fruits of that labor. When the time was right, when suspicions cooled and the North's lords no longer saw danger in every shadow, perhaps the secret vow could be made real. For now, Jon Snow continued his watch, king in the North, guardian of a fragile peace. And far away, he knew a princess of Dorne traveled southward, carrying the echo of that promise in her heart, the same promise that resonated through every silent hallway of Winterfell, a quiet testament to the future they both dared to believe in.